You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and now it's time for the Paranormal Peep Show.
Hi, welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Ward, and we have a guest presenter tonight. It's Ben Emlyn-Jones. How are you, Ben?
Hi, Neil. I'm very well, thanks. Good to be back on the show yet again. I always love these programs.
Thanks for joining us. And just to explain about Andy Chaplin is busy at the minute preparing for Halloween. So with his tuned in events, he's doing lots of events around the southeast, Hertfordshire area, Essex, that kind of way. Doing his tuned in events, that's where he does psychic and mediumship nights, entertainment nights, normally at pubs, and he's doing specials for Halloween. So go to Facebook on Tuned In Events and check that out if you're interested in having a reading in a pub in the southeast area. So good luck with that, Andy. So Ben, we have another guest with us tonight, and it's someone that you went to the Isle of Man with. Would you like to introduce her?
Yes, certainly. This is somebody I know very well, actually. I've met her many times, and we've been on a couple of adventures, and we've also been to conferences together. It is Jackie Tonks. Hey, Jackie.
Hello. Hi, it's nice to be back. I came on the show about 6 years ago, wasn't it? So
it's gone so quickly. You and Richard Freeman came on, and I think you was recording at Richard's house, wasn't you? I think you set up a microphone.
Yeah.
And so we discussed all manner of things, from everything Sasquatch to killer worms or something like that. And it's very interesting.
Mongolian death worms, wasn't it?
Mongolian death worms, that was it. Yeah, so thanks for coming back on with us. So basically, this show has kind of evolved from a few discussions, and we thought we're bringing people that know more about it than us, and that's naming yourself. I mean, Richard can't be with us because he's out hunting apes or something. Is that right?
Geeky Stan, looking for the gull, which is GUL. It's a type of ape-man type yeti thing. And he's also looking for the tiger out there. It's the Caspian tiger that's meant to be extinct, and yet people are seeing it. So
it's exciting because I remember he's been to G-Star before, and when at the last Weird Weekend North, he did a presentation about his adventure there, and he said he came very close to the gull. And he's convinced it exists. And, well, we wish him luck. Stay safe, Richard, and bring back the goods.
It does sound a dangerous pursuit, I must admit. I mean, when you go into that country and they say reasons for visiting the country, and you say, oh, I'm going to hunt creatures that don't officially exist. And there's that, oh, welcome to the country, sir, or something.
Yeah.
It must be a strange one.
It's supposed to be the locals are very, very friendly and, very helpful, he said. So, yeah. But the goal's supposed to be very aggressive. So he's sort of...
You definitely want the locals on your side.
He hopes he doesn't. He fights tiger won't be too friendly either.
Yeah, cool.
For a guy who says he hates camping, it's amazing because he keeps going to parts of the world where a tent is the only accommodation available.
Yeah.
So he puts up with it when he has to, yeah. But he's done other things. He's also been to Australia a couple of times because he's been after the Tasmanian tiger. He's written a book about that. It's a really extraordinary, interesting book.
Yeah,
wow.
And the orangutan deck, which is the new type 8 that's upright walking orangutan the species that might exist in Sumatra. There's a lot of different ones. He's into lake monsters a lot. I mean, I've been sort of more into the relic hominids, but obviously going to America, COVID put a stop to that, and I'm yet to go back. But myself and Ben, we were looking at the investigating with a group, Lapis, the Jeff the Talking Mongoose of the Isle of Man, which is quite a strange thing. And yeah, it's one of those that is investigated by Harry Price. You can't tell was it fate or did it really happen? But it's so bizarre, you tend to think it probably did really happen.
But it's an amazing story. I mean, we spent 8 days over there. It was me, Jackie, Richard, and a few other people. And I've never been to the Isle of Man before. It's one of the most extraordinary places. And we went to the location of the house, which unfortunately the house is now gone. There's just the foundation sticking out the ground. But we went to the location of the house of the family that had these encounters with Jeff the Talking Mongoose, allegedly. And we also managed to get hold of some offal from a butcher's, and Richard laid out a trap with the help of the other members of the team to try and photograph Jeff, or one of the cousins of Jeff, because there may be other mongooses of the non-talking variety.
They did introduce them to the Isle of Man, so we definitely know there were mongooses there, and the place we hire here in Cushling every year was the farm from which they were introduced to the Isle of Man.
We were Mongoose Ground Zero, where we were actually staying. The location was it 1917 or something that happened?
It was very early in the century. Yeah.
It was over 100 years ago, and there's every so often people see them. Maybe Jeff. I mean, Jeff maybe still around. We don't know, because we did rather controversially. We did a séance as well with Richard to try and conjure up the spirit of Jeff, because Jeff is likely to be some kind of, if it exists, it's likely to be not like an actual beast. It's likely to be some kind of zooform phenomenon, as Jonathan Downes calls them. And so we tried to conjure him up, but we didn't get any coherent results from the little Ouija board we created. But it was a bit nerve-wracking, but it was fun doing that.
I think it's a bit much to expect a mongoose to spell. I mean, talking is one thing.
Yeah.
Spelling after it's really pushing the boat out, isn't it? With credibility. But hey, you know.
He learned to read, though. He did supposedly learn to read. So,
didn't he catch a bus once or something as well? So
he used to then tell them the gossip, and he described the insides of somebody's flat that they'd never seen, and it turned out to be accurate. So there were some quite bizarre things with it, yeah. But interesting, the place we're staying is the house that was used for filming Sean Bean's film The Dark, the horror movie. So it's the same house, but it was quite funny itself, because years later, a guy, sort of rather eccentric guy, bought the house, and he was terrified of the Second World War and the bombing. And they just happened, there was only a couple of bombs dropped on the Isle of Man, and they were outside the house because they were jettisoning the bombs, and they just happened to do it right by his house. He moved to this remote house for the Isle of Man, and then they happened to jettison the bombs right outside his house.
I believe that. He'd been better off staying where he was.
Your fear's catching up with you, literally. Wow.
Yes,
I was going to say, Jackie, if you can remind listeners, because they may have either missed your first recording with us, but or you know, they may have forgotten. I don't know. Just to remind people that are listening and watching, what your skill set is in the paranormal and your particular focus of interest is, just so that we know where we're on the same page, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in cryptozoology and paranormal stuff. In terms of the cryptozoology, you know, I got particular interest in Bigfoots, Yetis, really hominids, and I sort of have been over to America, and I'm surprisingly lucky. I piss a lot of my American friends off. I've been trying to see one for 20 years. I basically, the first time I went out, I got footprints and heard a howl. The second time I went out, I had like 2 run in front of the car up a logging road in Northern California. So that was quite near Bluff Creek, clear as a bell, 20 to 4 in the afternoon. And then they run into burnt house trees. They panicked and dithered in the middle of the road. So I got an amazing view of them. And then my brain was like, can't cope with this. No, the men. And then about third day in, I went into shock and realised what I'd seen. But it's very weird when you first see them. And then about a year and a half, 2 years later, I went out after the conference, Sasquatch Summit, which is held in Washington State, Ocean Shores. And we asked the guy running the summit any recent sightings around here, because we actually had Bigfoots right outside the hotel there. And he said, "Oh, we've had solid activity a couple of miles away." So he gave me and Brooklyn, who's the guy who films the summit, rough directions. So we parked up, walked down this tiny logging road, and starts, I'm not very good at the howls, but Brooklyn's good at them. And he did the tree knocks and I did the whoops, which I'm really good at. And suddenly a pine cone was thrown at our feet, and we heard this. I didn't hear it because my ear flaps were down, but Brooklyn had a like this. And so it was either a bear or something gorilla-like sound. And then got a pine cone thrown at our feet, then stones got thrown, and then Brooklyn freaked and started swinging his torch around and held his machete up, and they didn't like that, so we got a rock came out. And we just legged it back to the car. But wherever it was, the noise it was making, it was flattish ground, and Brooklyn, I would say, is just over 6 feet. And this thing must have been about 7.5, 8 feet, because he said where the grunt came from was well above his head. So, and it literally about 5 feet away behind the undergrowth. So
Wow.
you can hear it breathing. It's like,
Was this in the daytime or night time?
it was about 11:15 at night.
Right.
Yeah, because it was near the coast. It was relatively mild, but it was still quite cold. But it's in November.
Wow.
But yeah, it was. And I had a thermal imager, and we got back to the car, and I said to Brooklyn, "I pull the car sideways because I got a thermal image of your car engine cooling down from right at the end of the path, which is probably about a quarter of a mile. So we should be able to get them if they come under the path." So we reluctantly pulled the car sideways. I pull the window down, and I see something coming towards me. And he, we both screamed like girls. And it turned out to be my finger on the end of the thermal. I won't repeat what he said, but it wasn't. It wasn't a brick. So freaked us both out. Yeah.
So,
So-
fun, isn't it?
So we're doing this show about cryptozoology, and one of the things that ignited my interest was one of our viewers, Gary Robinson. He watches Ben's shows as well. He also watches the Paranormal Peep show. We didn't invite him to take part, but I think he's really, really busy at the minute. But he sent through to me and Ben and Andy some photographs that he said, I recall seeing these in an album or book or something from the 1980s, and it got lost in his loft. But he said these pictures resurfaced on Facebook about 3 or 4 months ago now, and it was pictures of looked like hunting men in a barn that had hunted for want of a better word, I call it a pterodactyl. People call it a plesiosaur, I think, or something. But it looked like one of these prehistoric flying lizard type creatures with the head. And it looked real to me. And obviously, this is done in the days before Photoshop. Now, I was talking to you before we started recording, Jackie. You've got some information about that particular picture. haven't you?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Dr. Carl Schuker, cryptozoologist, who a really good way of checking these things is to reverse image search on the internet, and he managed to find the barn, the exact barn. And it could be there was 2 different shots of the barn, one years ago, one, but it very much looked like it had been photoshopped and things imposed on the front. So that's a good way of checking those things out. As I said, it could have just been a old shot of the barn and a modern shot of the barn, but it was a bit suspicious, really. Yeah.
So was it like a composite photograph? Because if this was in the 80s, this would have been.
It looks like it. Yeah. I mean, also some of these images, people are saying it's from the 80s, and they're not from the 80s. Some of them are, but some of these things you find out that image didn't appear before a certain date. So I think you've really got to do your homework with these things.
Yeah, there'd have to be an original one, wouldn't there? I mean, it would have to be an original. I mean, I saw that picture too, and it's always intrigued me. And I do wonder where the hell they gone, who those guys are. I mean, are they have they ever been traced?
Doubt it. Not from. There was 2 pictures. One that looked like they were lumberjack type hunters from their clothes, and the other one. There's another one in existence, and it's a similar kind of thing, but these look like men in Civil War uniforms that I've seen on the chap's website.
Which is suspicious. There's different types of outfits. Yeah.
Yeah, although this guy was really going into detail. He was looking at the buttons on the uniforms and all that kind of stuff. And he was also looking at, for instance, he was pointing out things that he said, would this be faked? And he was looking at what he perceived to be drag marks in the ground where they dragged this pterodactyl, if you want to call it that, pterodactyl into the picture. Or
A flying dinosaur and a photo from the American Civil War? Not exactly. This photograph was probably recorded years after the Civil War ended, during the Reconstruction era. What about this apparent pterodactyl? It is more likely than not a genuine pterosaur that was alive during the 19th century. For details, see a link in the description to see this video. Now look at this weird feature on the wing. What is that? It's also on the other wing. The end parts of the wings were inverted. In other words, this apparent modern pterosaur is more likely than not genuine.
yeah, although this guy was really going into detail. He was looking at the buttons on the uniforms and all that kind of stuff. And he was also looking at, for instance, he was pointing out things that he said, would this be faked? And he was looking at what he perceived to be drag marks in the ground where they dragged this pterodactyl, if you want to call it that, pterodactyl into the picture, or and parts where the bush had been cut down or something. It's just like what I would call maybe environmental evidence, things that seem to support the fact that there was this big something in the picture. Now, maybe it could have been a large buffalo or bison or something they'd killed, and that could have accounted for the drag marks, and they've literally just photoshopped this thing over the top of it. Yeah. So there could be those things. Or someone is very, very astute with Photoshop and thinks of all these little things like, let's put some drag marks in there, and it would take an awful lot of work.
Some people put shadows in the right direction as well.
That's right.
They're really clever with
That's right. Yeah.
Photoshop. And they did have Photoshop in the, might remember in the 80s, didn't they? I think it was.
Yeah, they were crude.
Yeah.
There were comparatively simplistic ways of faking a photograph using computers back then. Yeah, I mean,
But if that picture was 80s, we need to check whether it was.
well, if it may look older, but if the earliest prints only date back from a certain time, that's probably when the photo was produced. But it's like, a pterosaur, one of these pterodactyls or pteranodons, there's different species. I mean, they were basically reptiles which grew wings, bat-like wings, and could fly. Some people said they didn't flap their wings and just glided. I mean, if they lived today, where would they live? I mean, whereabouts would they survive? Where would they be found? Obviously, in an area without human habitation. In which case, what were these guys doing there? Where were they? Things like that. So these sort of questions are valid. I mean, it's true that sometimes really old creatures that everyone thinks have been extinct for a long, long time do turn up. The coelacanth is the obvious.
Yeah, I suppose that's on the bottom of the sea, isn't it? It's not like a 20-foot bird that's floating around.
These pterosaurs were huge. I mean, they were bigger than modern flying birds.
I mean, some of the ones, there was that some Quetzalcoatl thing. It was massive. It was like a 20-foot, 33-foot wingspan, but you wouldn't miss one of those, would you?
Well, what's slightly more...
Also, a lot of them couldn't take off. They could only take off from cliffs, they reckon. They couldn't do it from the ground. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's like I mean, what's slightly more plausible is the stories of giant birds. I mean, the Amerindian natives have stories of what they call the thunderbird, which is like a giant bird of prey. Not as big as the roc, from the Arabian Nights, but it would be like comparative in size. Just simply because that's a bird and not a reptile, it's more likely to exist. Although, again, it's unconfirmed that this thing actually exists or not. I know it was written in a book I read. There was a big chapter in a book, I think it may be one of Richard's actually, about it. About the possibility there's this thunderbird saying.
It's interesting talking to, I have got to know Rex Yappi. He's a cryptozoologist from Papua New Guinea, and he's First Nation person, native of Papua New Guinea, and the ropen's meant to have a long tail with a luminous thing on the end. They reckon, one theory is it uses it for fishing, but there's no mammals that are known to have luminosity. For warm-blooded animals and loans, only sea creatures. So, and plants. So that's a bit unusual, really. And its description, I know various people analysed it, said it doesn't quite, in evolutionary terms, it doesn't sound sensible. It's supposed to have a really long tail, and the bigger pterosaurs, they had shorter tails because it's not ergonomic. There was some really small species, a couple of feet across, 3-4 feet, that and Max had like a sort of tail with a barb on the end, but only the big ones didn't. They almost completely lost the little spiky bit on the end. There was hardly any tail, the big ones. So it doesn't quite fit what we know, really. Yeah.
Now, when you mentioned the word roper, now I'm familiar with it, but and the area of Papua New Guinea. Now I understand that's what the Papua New Guineans call pterodactyl sightings or pterosaur sightings out there. They call it the ropen, for those that need to understand that. Now, I did some research into it some years ago, because what triggered my research then, it was about 12 years ago, I think I first heard of it. I was friends with a guy on Facebook who was a pilot, and I did meet him eventually. And he sent me an account of a friend of his. He said, I know you'll be interested in this. And he sent it to him, and he said, this is from a fellow pilot that he was friends with, who was absolutely straight as a die, bound, but won't take nonsense. And it was his job, apparently, at some point in the past, 15 years ago, I don't know when exactly it happened, that he flew from northern Australia with a colleague once a week out to Papua New Guinea to deliver medical supplies or something like that in a small kind of lightweight plane, island hopper type of thing. And they typically flew about 4,000 feet high. And this guy wrote an account of what he'd seen. And as they was approaching one of the islands surrounding Papua New Guinea, they saw what they initially believed to be an aeroplane flying towards them. And they remarked that surely it should have its navigation lights on. It's the rules of, it's like driving at night with a car. You've got to have your lights on,
Oh, yeah.
And all planes should have their navigation lights on. And they couldn't understand why this plane coming towards them didn't have its navigation lights on. And then apparently they either nearly hit it or they flew over. I'm not quite sure that part of the story. But as they looked down towards it, one of the people, and I think it was the guy that wrote his account, said, "Oh my God, are we in Jurassic Park or something?" So I know that it's definitely after Jurassic Park that this event must take place then to reference that film. And they looked down and they couldn't believe what they saw. They apparently said, "We saw a pterodactyl flying below us." And this is two pilots, absolutely. He said, "I would not believe it if you had told me this story. I would not believe it." But he said, "I know it's true because I saw it myself." And this was a qualified pilot. Doesn't make him a qualified zoologist, of course, but he's also familiar with that area, flying there backwards and forwards every week. And they saw this creature there. So then I started to look into it, and I found a few documentaries online to do with people's sightings in Papua New Guinea. And Rex must have been involved with those kind of people, I'd imagine, where there's claims of some of these things taking some of the kids or something, from certain villages, kidnapping them and trying to take them away or something. You must have heard that, Jackie, as well, I imagine.
I've not heard I've heard about those men to dig up graves and eat remains of bodies. That's the legendary stuff around them. But yeah, I haven't heard a bit about them taking children. But yeah, I mean, it's very, looking at the stuff on the internet, a lot of it is done by creationists. So you've got to be a little bit careful, I suppose, what the motives are really. How they're interpreting it.
Yeah, because I've discovered this guy called Jonathan, might be Whitaker, but I can't remember now.
Yeah, I've looked at this. Yeah.
Yeah, with the website Protect Wild Animals or something it's called.
Yeah.
Does lots of videos, interesting videos. And I think from what I gather, he's a kind of creationist person. Yeah. And he interviewed this lady who was a missionary. I think I mentioned that in my messages to you. he interviewed this lady who was a missionary who, with her family, when she was a missionary out in Papua New Guinea, sighted two of them flying down the river past her or something. And she would be a creationist. So what's the angle of a creationist? Why would they want to believe in these sort of things?
Well, I suppose they don't want I don't know. I mean, it doesn't necessarily disprove just because there's a modern thing that looks like a pterodactyl. Evolution didn't happen, but I suppose their goal is to say that dinosaurs are around modern day, so they couldn't, that they were just been created, because they only go back 10,000 years, don't they, creationists? They only believe everything's existed within 10,000 years. So they're looking for evidence that these things could have been around within that 10,000 years, rather than this massive gap of, 70 million years, whatever. They want to sort of prove that. So they're looking, and people found those stones, didn't they, in America, with pictures of people riding dinosaurs.
Stones, yeah.
Clearly fake,
but it's they literally believe things like, because they need to explain the presence of dinosaur fossils, and so they said, well, obviously Noah must have had them on the ark, and dinosaurs must have been on the ark, because it is, according to them, the Earth is just, the entire universe just started a few thousand years ago. I think it was Bishop Ussher, the guy who he worked out the genealogy of all the biblical figures from the Old Testament, and he worked out that he worked out the exact day creation happened. I think it was 4004 BC or something like that. And Noah therefore had his ark around about the middle of the fourth millennium BC.
I'm just thinking, how many creatures on the ark did the Tyrannosaurus Rex eat?
I know.
Oh no, we've lost
It would have been a very easy
Oh,
passenger, wouldn't it? It would have been very, very difficult to keep.
I think the unicorns were the first to go.
Well, that's that life from Good Omens. Well, now, unicorns getting away.
Yeah.
But as far as New Guinea goes, it is it's one of the most mysterious places on Earth. I mean, there's really famous UFO sightings there. I know that it's very isolated. I know that there's a human population there which is extremely isolated. I know because I met a guy when I was in Australia when I went to see my brother. He was an anthropologist who'd been to New Guinea, and he'd just come back. He basically went on foot into the deep jungles, which is him and his language interpreter, to speak to some of the local people there. And they came across people who were really amazingly amazingly insular. They asked him and his companion, why have you painted yourself white? And they literally had to explain to these people through the interpreter, this is their natural skin color. And these people had no idea that white people existed.
I had that in Africa, actually. We went on a different route after coming back from seeing the mountain gorillas, and we went through a village, and the young children went hysterical when they saw us and ran off screaming, and we interpreters, what's the matter? And they said they'd never seen white people, they think you're ghosts. So these poor kids, they grabbed them by the scruff of the neck, they dragged them towards us and made them touch us, and they were screaming their heads off. It was so cruel. But as soon as they touched us, they realised, we were warm, we must be all right. They were holding their hands by the end and playing with us, but it was just bizarre. Just like in modern day, I didn't think that would happen.
It was interesting.
It must be so it must be quite an extraordinary experience. I mean, in this case, in Papua New Guinea village, the entire community, adults and children, had never seen white people. For those people, it must be like meeting aliens.
Yeah.
Because these strange creatures come from a world, which they didn't even know existed.
Well, in a minute, Ben, I'll ask you to talk to us about that alien encounter in Papua New Guinea. But I will just interject here quickly, because what you're talking about being ghosts and that, interpreted as ghosts, I did see, about 6 months to a year ago, again on YouTube, I think it was a video from a documentary from the 1990s, maybe early 90s. And I think, if I'm correct, it was a Belgian anthropologist or film crew going out to one of these regions of Papua New Guinea, going into this area, and they were going to make contact with a tribe that no white people are apparently encountered. And they were standing on one side of this river, and the people of this tribe were looking at them from the side with their spears and things. And there was like a log going across this river. So the white man, the Belgian guy, would go across the log and meet this kind of guy halfway, and he would put out his hand to touch him, and they would sort of touch it tentatively and think, you're real, and they would run back a bit and then come back a bit closer. And eventually, like you say, by the end of the day, they kind of befriended them, and they said, we heard about white people, but our grandfathers told us about white people, but they said they believed white people to be ghosts, just like you said with Africa. Yeah. So they do see them, and they have legends of ghosts in that thing, and it's actually just us people.
I think some people, from what I heard, and it's accurate, but I heard sometimes people dark skin, when they die, they can lose their colour. So that I think that's where it comes from. But that's what the Africans told us. But it might not be. That's what they told us in this village, but might not be accurate. But yeah.
Yeah. So Ben, getting back to this UFO alien sighting, it was a reverend or something out there, a missionary guy, wasn't it?
Yes, a gentleman called William Gill. He was a missionary in this particular area and around about in the late 1950s. And he had a little church in this very remote area, which he made friends with the local people. He had a number of parishioners who used to come to the church regularly. And he was on the beach one night. It was a pleasant evening, and he was there on the beach. And he saw literally a disc-shaped object descend. It was a silver disc-shaped object with glowing lights on it. What's remarkable about this, because this is a close encounter of the third kind, because there were a number of people, a number of beings on the things. They weren't inside it looking through windows or anything like that. They were actually standing on top of it. It appears that there was some kind of open deck on top. This is very similar to the Aldborough sighting, which we talked about in the previous show.
Yeah.
Except this was a larger object with a more substantial base. And he describes them as being humanoid. He couldn't see them up close. This object was quite a long way away, but he could see that they were like humanoid people, and they appear to be glowing. He describes them as people who had like a yellow glow on them. What's interesting is he had his wife and the parishioner stared at it for a while. He actually waved to this particular object, and believe it or not, the creatures waved back.
Papua New Guinea, June 1959. An Australian missionary spots a large disc hovering just 200 feet off the ground while standing with 38 other people.
This solid-looking object, and can you imagine what it's like to look up in the sky and see some figures up there?
All were amazed to see 4 small occupants dressed in what looked like black diving suits.
Figures walking about on top, and not the slightest noise whatsoever. And so we waved. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get this object down onto the playing field? And as we waved, wondering whether we'd get some recognition and whether perhaps they would understand what we wanted, they waved back.
The encounter lasted several hours before the object abruptly departed.
There was this amazingly incredible speed that the whole craft disappeared to nothing across the bay in a matter of a second or so.
It was really extraordinary, and eventually it actually just flew away. But it was it's a very, very unique encounter. He wrote about it very clearly in his diary. This is a guy who probably he didn't fit the profile of someone who'd make something like this up. He was a minister of the church. He was on a very important he was at a very important place, spreading the word to the people of this remote island. He wouldn't have wanted to look like a nutcase, or like he was, because of course the bishops and people like that might have thought he was taking drugs or something.
And it would have been contrary to his beliefs, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
it sort of, so yeah, it wouldn't have particularly been in his favour if he, yeah.
I don't think they'd liked it. Yeah, I mean, there are, of course, there's nothing that directly contradicts most religions that alien life exists, but it's not an established position within the church. You won't get your local you can't really get your local vicar to have a discussion about this sort of thing. Even today, but back then, this was the 1950s. This guy was Australian. He was probably quite a conservative person, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And so I'm inclined to believe him. This guy Gill, yeah.
I think he wrote a passage in the rest of the book when he wrote his account of it, where the alien wound down the window and shouted across to him, "Here, mate, we got a load of rope and to drop off. Where do you want them?"
There's the origin. Yeah, there's the
Yeah,
origin.
we want to start some rumours, they're saying.
Yeah.
So your friend Rex in Papua New Guinea, just tell us a little bit about him and how you got to know him and what he's brought to the table, figuratively speaking.
It was quite bizarre. I was chatting with Richard and I said, we've got to make a contact in Papua New Guinea, as you do, so we can go and explore, because there's also meant to be thylacines there, you know, the stripy wolf type dog thing that was in Tasmania. And they definitely used to be there in Papua New Guinea as well as mainland Australia. But it's probably out the places it's the most likely they still are. And there'd been reports of them, so we got to look at them. And then, like a day, I think it was a day or literally 2 days after, 1 or 2 days after, suddenly this guy out of the blue in Papua New Guinea says, "Will you be my friend? I'm a cryptozoologist." It's like, wow. And all right, Richard, I said, you won't believe it. I've just been befriended by someone in Papua New Guinea who's invited us over now. We haven't got over yet, but it looks a really challenging environment. I mean, he's shown me pictures of cars, you know, in mud, and literally you can just see the top of the car because the mud's like, you know, right up the side of oh my God. He showed me videos and it looks scary, you know.
Yeah, hope you don't get caught in one of those.
Not our idea of concept of mud, you know.
Yeah. So he has an interest in cryptozoology, but he has a day job, I suppose, from what you told me.
Yeah. He does some other work, but various things. But yeah, he's really dedicated. I mean, the thing is for him, he owns quite a bit of land there, so he produces his own food and, you know, trees, produce his own house. But it's sort of him trying to buy the equipment he needs, like drones, and he's always trying to fundraise for that, really, because those sort of things are quite expensive. And they, you know, he's got quite a lot of help from the Americans, you know, they send stuff over. But it's just trying to, because obviously in that environment, it's extremely humid. A lot of drones don't last, really. You know, or they lose military.
To use in his cryptozoology research.
Yeah, looking for the rope. And so, yeah. So, you know, he's always grateful for any contributions towards that. Wow. And he said he gets quite frustrated because the locals, you know, they're either very superstitious and they don't want to know about it, or they just sort of, because he's the only cryptozoologist as far as he knows in Papua New Guinea, you know, they just dismiss him like, oh, what is this crazy stuff for? So he's been fighting a losing battle, really. But, you know, he is starting to get, you know, been trying to get the government to, you know, give him support for things, but it's still a bit of a battle. So he's trying to get a lot of people to back him, and yeah, he's doing his best. Yeah.
No wonder he's keen to reach out to other people from abroad, because you must be quite lonely being the only cryptozoologist on the
yeah,
islands.
They don't really have many conferences there, I'd imagine, of that sort of thing.
No.
So I see it must be a bit of a lease of life for him then.
Yeah, I mean, he really likes chatting about things. You know, he's described what he's seen and other people have seen, and it does seem to be a consistent animal. I mean, my theory is it a giant bat? You know, it could be a very giant bat, and these luminous things, a lot of people think the luminous bit's actually an aircraft that's close by, so you're seeing the two things together. You know, it doesn't mean you see one thing, it's associated with another, and I think that's a tendency people have, isn't it? And also the size, it's very, very difficult to estimate size in the sky. You've got to have it next to something, you know, and
yeah.
I think myself and Richard Freeman, last February, went down the Waverley Abbey. This is going to be in the Fortune Times soon, an article on it. 10 adults had been in Waverley Abbey do some table tipping to talk to the ghosts there. And suddenly they all saw a dragon. Some of them saw one dragon, some saw 3 dragons. One of them said the dragon was over 30 feet long, the big dragon. There were smaller dragons. They described something like a dragon tail, and them sitting there, and typical dragon, you know, and you're just thinking, whoa, you know, what, you know, it's trying to get, you know, is it that easy to estimate size? I asked the one lady, like, you know, how big was it compared to the bench? There was it's like a little stately home thing there. So like, as just behind, there's the old abbey, there's a stately home thing opposite. And there's some benches around the stately home. Like, how many benches long would it have been? And she almost got it dead on. She was about 6 inches out. So, so she was pretty good at judging size, but the thing was over a tree, so you couldn't tell. You probably wouldn't have been able to tell, from that distance exactly how big it was. And also people will, it's like with a rope, and it's like people say, oh, it had bat-like skin. But if it's that high up, how are you going to tell? You're not going to be able to tell whether it's feathers, whether it's just, looking smooth because the way the light's going on it. It could be an aeroplane, you're just not going to be able to tell. And I think your brain sort of projects a lot on it. Now, the thing with this dragon sighting, there were water next to us, herons in it. Herons look quite a lot like dragons. I don't think in this case it was, because quite a few of the people had a lot of experience of bird watching, and they very much said, no, that's definitely not what we saw. But the ropen, there's also the frigate bird, which is, sort of quite heron-like as well, a seabird. And I think a lot of the pictures you get the frigate bird, because it's also got a bright red sack around its throat. You've got sunlight behind that, it'll glow, appear to glow. So you've got, and with a dragon sighting we saw, there's herons. If a heron got a float and a bit of line stuck on its foot or on its tail, and fishermen, it would look like a tail, dragging behind it. So you've got to think, is it your brain? It's like, with a ghost thing with the grey ladies. If you're told there's a grey lady in a place, you're going to see it, aren't you? But, and I think, people, they know the brain now projects a lot of what it sees. If you get burgled, you won't notice what's gone missing straight away. I've been burgled, I didn't even realise half the stuff was missing, because your brain hallucinates a lot of it to stop you exhausting yourself. And, then you think, oh, we go to use it. And you think, hang on, it's not there. It was there. And then you think, no, it couldn't have been there. It must have, the policeman was saying, I got burgled once. The policeman said, no, your brain thinks it's there, but it's not there. And it's a similar thing with a perception, it's like this friend I remember seeing, your brain projects a lot. I remember seeing what her thought was a friend Rosie walking towards me in Topless in Devonport, and said, hello, Rosie. She was in front of me. And then as soon as the woman responded, the face changed, and my brain had thought, that is Rosie. And you project the images, so, just to save your brain from getting exhausted. So they're also finding out a lot of these, the pterosaur sightings, they're the perceptions of the person's textbook of a pterosaur. And some of them are now out of date, so they're not actually accurate to what we know pterosaurs were anymore. They don't think a lot of pterosaurs had feathers and fluffy fur type stuff on them, so they're not looking like bats,
It's interesting because I was in a museum recently down in Bridge. Where is it? Bridgewater. Forget what it is. It's near us anyway, and it's an old museum, and of course museums are old. But it's interesting. They were promoting the Jurassic coastline of Dorset, and they were talking about pterosaurs or pterodactyls. And they exist now. They make them as kites for people to fly. And they had one set up in the museum with its wingspan, so I videoed it.
Oh, yeah.
But, it's great for kids to actually test fly these pterodactyls and things, yeah. And I can imagine there'd be people around now saying in Britain, oh, we've seen pterodactyls flying, and it could actually just be a kite or something and not realising
my friend's got some massive kites from China, and they're like 40, 50 across, and she's taken them up on Dartmoor and freaked people out. She's got this massive big octopus that look like some alien entity. And I mean, you can, they do look quite scary if you get them to the wrong lights. And I think, some of these, that one, was at the film, I think it was in Minnesota, the one where it flies over and turns its head and looks down and carries on. That's mechanical. You can just tell it's something mechanical, isn't it? Or some sort of, radio control thing.
Radio control. Yeah.
I think it's radio control because it's quite mechanical, isn't it? It doesn't quite move right. But I don't know. It's difficult to tell, but you've got to take all these things into account, haven't you, really?
Yeah.
You
What
can't
would you
always
say, Ben?
rely on. Let's say you can't always rely on witness testimony alone for that reason, and we do edit out of the way we see things. And like I say, range is very, very difficult to calculate for something in the sky. When an aeroplane flies over on a clear blue day, there's nothing to gauge its range because there are no clouds. You can almost imagine reaching up and grabbing it. It looks like a tiny little thing like that, and of course it's not. It's thousands of feet up, but it looks close. And I mean, this is a common problem in ufology, that you can't actually necessarily know what you're looking at. On the other hand, though, I mean, I always spend time listening to people who describe what they see, because there have been several experiments. For example, there's the famous there was a documentary called A Very British UFO Hoax, where somebody built a fake UFO. They built a fake flying saucer. It was like an airship, an unmanned airship with electric motors. They filled it with gas, and they flew it over the West Country where all the hippies gather and things like that, and over Avebury and places like that. And of course, it did work in a sense, because people were fooled. They said there's a UFO up there, and it was even got into the news. They said people saw a flying saucer flying over various parts of the crop circle country, and this, of course, was part of the trick. I think that these people were sort of pranking, but it backfired in a way, because the witnesses actually described pretty much what they saw. There were no embellishments. They didn't say. No one came forward and said, it shone down a big beam of light and it got inside my head and I had a telepathic message from it, or things like that. That didn't happen. So it seems even the most gullible members of society can be actually, maybe they're better witnesses than we give them credit for. On the other hand, though, Jackie's right in saying that, that alone is not proof, and we need things like photographs and other forms of physical evidence. Problem with photographs is if you take them, someone will accuse you of faking them. And in this day and age,
no, it's so good, isn't it?
In this day and age, they might be right.
You can look at them, but yeah,
that's the problem. They might be right.
Yeah.
That's the problem. So it's a very, very difficult situation. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, especially when you're going to a remote part of the world. You may see something. You may be the only witness who sees it, and you may take a photograph of it, which no one will believe. It's a very, very tricky. It's a very difficult business to be in.
Did these people that saw these dragons in the was it cathedral or somewhere?
Waverley Abbey, which is
Waverley
not far
Abbey,
from
yeah.
Brighton, basically. It's quite close to Brighton.
So they were seeing these dragons outside the abbey, not inside it.
He was outside. One was hovering over a tree and did a circle over the tree, and then looked at her and went off. I remember. And the others were like land. Well, they did actually land on part of the abbey, which is like just wally type bit, and land, and then they could see the tails hanging down, but they were really little ones, like 5 foot, 6 foot. Across.
When did this occur?
Tails?
Sighting.
Yeah, they basically proper dragon fork tails. But
Fully fledged.
And you don't, it's an interesting thing with that, you just don't know whether the one person said it and then the others got ideas, but it didn't sound like that. They all seem to have differently got, and then spoke afterwards about it. So it was quite convincing.
Phone cameras then, or was that? Well, I'm not sure when this occurred.
No, it was really quite dark, but they all sort of, the moonlight hit it and they saw it. So they got, the moonlight wasn't, but I think it just happened so fast. They're all like, whoa.
So that's the first thing against doing is that, any skeptics listening to this say, but of course it was dark, so they couldn't really see it. And it was probably, escaped albatrosses from the local zoo, or, what
I wonder whether it was that, because they got it was February, but they had got those, projecting lights like you have, like on stately homes to light them up. And I wonder whether the heat had attracted flies, and then there was bats that was roosting, but they felt warmed up enough to come out because of the lights, But they said no, these things were really large. They weren't bats, But you can get, of course, bats projected by light, so it could be a projected image. But they went into detail on it, which didn't fit with that, like it was a shadow or anything.
Sure,
it has like
there might be. Go on, Ben.
I was going to say, if it has a dangling tail or something, that's not a bird. If that is inaccurate, if that's accurate.
I mean, Richard will go into more detail on the dragon and stuff, but dragons seem to be something paranormal. They don't seem to be a real they are a creature. They're probably multi-dimensional. You know, they're not something that they've got something very unusual about them. They don't seem to be a flesh and blood creature as we know. You know, so
the first book of Richard's I read was his book of Dragons More Than a Myth, which is I never read a book on dragons before, so I was very, very intrigued to. This is before I actually met Richard and not to know him, but it was a very, very interesting book.
It goes into there's a good chapter on them in. He did 2-volume thing with the first book describing the background to them. Well, he does a good chapter on dragons there as well. Talks about the monks in, I think it was Lindisfarne, I think, seeing a dragon flying over and writing it in their journal. Wow. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. So what it was.
I do find it interesting that societies from all over the world have legends of giant reptilians. I mean, they vary in various ways. I mean, obviously, a Chinese dragon is different from the European dragon. The European dragon is the classic one with the fire drake, as Richard calls it, the scaly reptilian beast with back. You see on the flag of Wales, that kind of. But of course, these similar creatures exist in other societies as well.
And a ropen could be a dragon if it's got like fiery stuff.
It has a fire in their bellies, doesn't there? Allegedly.
That could explain, for example, the glowing, the light.
Yeah.
I do find it interesting when many people from all over the world, especially this is the point I made about sleep paralysis. When people from all over the world in different cultures, some of which have really had no contact until recent years and global travel, etc., they come up with the same mythology. It's likely they're talking about something that is objectively real.
I'm just wondering if these dragons sighted at Waverley Abbey would have been. In fact, it sounds weird. I think I've been there and photographed someone. If it's the same place, small place, yeah. And is it Hampshire or you said Brighton, didn't you?
I looked into. Oh God, it's far along going off. It's a bit misty, it'll be all right. I live on a boat, and when it gets a bit misty, it sets it off. It's gone.
It's not a rope and setting it off.
Have I got a rope and I'm going to drag it in?
Yeah. You never know. It could track you down.
Yeah, I was on a podcast a while back, and everybody thought their alarms were going off, and it was my parrot doing it. And they all started looking for a pipe. It got very misty.
Excellent.
But yeah, so it's. I mean, I'd more believe in a dragon than I would a ropen, to be quite frank. I think there's more evidence for dragons than there is ropens.
Interesting. That's interesting. Because now the guy that does this animals YouTube thing, and he covers a lot of ropen sightings in Papua New Guinea. He's also got sightings from other parts of the world. And one of them, I think, was someone in Vietnam from the Vietnam War. And it was like 2 Vietnam soldiers that were American soldiers in Vietnam. And they were like, they might have been by a harbor or something like that. And they saw them very clearly, these pterodactyl or whatever you want to call them, flying. And one of the guys happened to be a very good artist. He actually drew it very clearly. And it absolutely looked like a proper pterodactyl.
Yeah, I've seen the sketch of that. It's been right. So that's quite interesting. Yeah.
That would be. I mean, there is another case. Certainly a case where a soldier, an American soldier in Vietnam, saw a humanoid being, a winged humanoid. That's quite a well-known case. It has to be said, though, that even though it was very, very strictly against regulations, troops in that war did use drugs in various kinds.
Well, they usually use amphetamines to keep themselves awake, didn't they? They now supposedly give them sherbet, the sweet sherbet, because it gives you that shock. And I've used that when I've been trying to finish assignments for degrees. People
do use them.
That's what they do instead of amphetamines, supposedly.
Doctors at my hospital used to use amphetamines strictly against the rules, and if they were caught, but it was, I think management turned a blind eye. And indeed, so there was all kinds of, I mean, I know amphetamines are not they're not hallucinogenic, but I mean there were other drugs involved. There were other drugs around. LSD was quite well known at the time. This isn't me. I'm not playing skeptic's advocate here. It's just this is a possibility, along with the stress and the lack of sleep and things.
Although you'd think if there's 2 of them and they both agree that they've seen this thing together, and then later in a much more calmer state, maybe 10 hours later or something, he's drawing 2 images of it with pencils and crayons and things like that. And he says, this is what I saw. And his friend also will look at the picture and say, yeah, I agree, Bill, that's what you saw.
Yeah.
Rather than say, oh, no, don't you remember we were both toked up earlier and we were really, digging it, They both maintain that story. And even years later, when they reported it to whoever it may be that's looking into the story, So I do find that there's a consistency that they, and that's happened with people that told me personal stories, strange people. I say strange people, strange encounters. When I did my talk at Probe, my very first appearance at Probe, I spoke about centaur beings, and this lady came up to me and she says, "I'm so glad you mentioned the cloven-hoofed being sighted in a mosque in Iran." And I
remember that. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Just to recap for those that really need to know, I'll cover it briefly. I met this guy on a plane. He was from Iran. I thought he was Spanish. We were flying to Spain for a holiday. Got in a conversation with him. It turned out that he was an architect. And I started talking about fairies with him. And I showed him some of the drawings on my camera that I'd photographed. And I told him some strange stories that we'd researched in a film documentary about fairies. And he opened up a little bit to me because I think that he perhaps wouldn't have told this to anybody else. But because I was talking on the wacky stuff, he was thinking, okay, I can share this story with him and he's not going to laugh at me. And he said that when he was a soldier out in Iran, because that's where he said he's from, he said, I call it Persia, but you today call it Iran. He says, I was a conscripted soldier and I was doing a night shift with an army buddy and a sandstorm had kicked up and we took shelter in a mosque. And so we both took it in turns to kind of stay awake. One sleeps and one stays awake. And his mate went to sleep first of all. And this guy sat against the mosque, the back, his wall. The wall was against his back, and the mosque had the gun. And his mate was sleeping beside him, and he kept trying not to fall asleep. And on the third time, he fell asleep and woke up. And on the third time, he woke up and thought, "I must stay awake." And he suddenly saw this lady staring down at his feet, and this young girl staring down at his army friend's feet. Because of course they've taken their shoes off because they're in a mosque. There's their bare feet. And they were staring intently at their feet, looking at them. And this guy thought, where did they come from? And he said at that point, as he's wrapping the strap of the gun around his arm, because he wanted to make a run for it, even though he had the gun, he said that this lady looked up at him and stared him straight in the eye. And he said, as soon as he made eye contact with her, he said, I knew that she wasn't from this world. Something just clicked, and I knew that she wasn't from this world. It's like some sort of psychic connection that tells you stuff, And he said at that point, the lady stood up and the young girl stood up and they turned and walked away. And as they walked away, he noticed they both had cloven-hoofed feet and they vanished into the wall of the mosque. And when he told me that, a shiver ran up and down my spine. I'm thinking, oh, my God. So anyway, I told that at the Probe conference, the first time I did a talk at Probe. And this lady came up afterwards. She goes, I'm so glad you told that story because I thought I was going crazy. I said, well, what's happened to you? And she said that she had gone to hospital to have a baby, and unfortunately she gave stillbirth. It died during birth. And so they put her in this private room to kind of come to terms with it as best as she could. And they said they put the dead body of the baby in the cot next to her. And she said she sat on the end of the bed crying and thinking, what on earth, how on earth am I going to be strong for my husband and my family? Here I am crying. I can't even sort of come to terms with this. She goes, at that point, the door opened and in came 4 or 5, she wasn't sure the exact number, 4 or 5 small centaur beings, she said, maybe a foot high. And she said they weren't pretty. They were very ugly creatures with ugly faces. She said 2 of them looked over in the cot of the dead baby, and a couple of others, maybe 2 or 3, looked up at her face and just stared at her. And she said something changed with her. She suddenly felt strong and able to carry on. And so whatever they did had some sort of psychological positive healing effect on her psychologically wise. And then they went. Now, I don't know where they went, whether they went back out of the room or they just vanished. She didn't say, but she just sort of said the benefit she received.
I would have thought she'd be more traumatized, wouldn't you? See that?
Absolutely.
They're not like angels.
Yeah.
I know people who've had tragedies and things like this, or they're very sick, or they have had a tragedy like that, or they're very, very sick in bed, and they're visited by angelic beings. That's quite common, who give them comfort. But centaur-like beings that are very ugly, angels don't normally appear in that form. They're usually pleasant. They usually have pleasant appearance. On the subject of the pterodactyls and the rope, and it's we know you've heard of time slips of people who have experiences of seeing something that was from the past. This has happened to me.
That's another possibility. Yeah, I've seen a couple of times.
Yeah, it could be that the reason they see these dinosaur-like creatures because they are literally seeing something that used to be there. A creature that used to fly in the skies and no longer does. They're just having a vision of the past. This has happened to me. I described it when I was in a pub once at the Bases Project in a function room. I had just for a few seconds, I had a vision of something that looked like something that happened in that room many, many years earlier. It was. Should I tell the whole story? Can I tell a story briefly?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes before break, and after this, we'll take a break.
Okay, to put it very, very briefly, I was at the Bases Project conference in the pub called the Black Swan, a very old pub, many centuries old. I went into a half-asleep state while I was in the room and found myself standing at the back of the room. The fire was lit behind me. The big table in the middle had been laid with a white cloth, and there were people sitting around the table, not the people who were at the conference. Miles and the others had just vanished. They'd all vanished. The people were sitting and laughing and having a good time. They were eating dinner, it looked like. There were some half-eaten plates of food. There were some glasses of red wine. And they appeared to be, it was like a party. They were well-dressed. There was a slightly retro look to the way their hair and their clothing and hair looked a little bit sort of retro. Well, afterwards I worked out it's probably the fashions of the 1900 to 1920 time period. This lasted, I would say, less than 3 seconds, and I was back in the room. I woke up properly, I was back in the room. But it was very, very vivid. They didn't seem to perceive me. I was just standing there. I could feel the heat of the fire. I could smell cigarette smoke, and some of the men were smoking, which you never do nowadays, And that's just one example. Many, many, many people have this experience. They do. So, I just wondered if maybe, I mean, obviously this was from comparatively recently, but is it possible that there's a time, of course, where these creatures did fly through the skies of this earth? Were they perceiving something that used to happen?
I suppose you'd have to check, were they native to that area?
Yeah.
I mean, Papua New Guinea, I don't know whether it just used to be, didn't exist then. Was it just volcanoes? I'm not too sure. And I know it was part of, probably part of another.
Well, they may be seeing a parallel. They maybe have a vision of a parallel universe, which they do exist. Parallel universes, a vision of a parallel universe, which is very, very similar to Earth's own past.
I mean, if there are time slips, which possibly there are, I'm open to the idea. I would have thought there might be reports additionally of Tyrannosaurus rexes or Brontosauruses as well, perhaps.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Why is it this rope? There is somebody saying they saw a dinosaur running through a forest a while back, but I wonder whether it was one of those, those jokey suits you can get for your dog. That like Tyrannosaurus rex happened with it. It's one of those, so you can't rule these things out.
Right, I think what we'll do, we'll take a break here and replenish our drinks, and we're going to be talking more on ropen dinosaurs, T-Rexes, Brontosauruses, and maybe talk a little bit about Sasquatch and Bigfoot in part 2. So join myself, Ben, Emlyn-Jones, and Jackie Tonks on the Paranormal Peep Show in just a minute.
Today's the best day of my life! Woohoo! Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Join Andy and Neil every month on the Paranormal Peep Show, part of the Paranormal UK Radio Network, for fun, frolics, and lots of information about weird stuff, UFOs, ghosts, and things that go bump in the night and everything associated with them. Fascinating guests, fascinating talk, fascinating information.
Hi, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Neil Ward, and we have Ben, Emlyn-Jones, and cryptozoologist expert Jackie Tonks joining us. So, Jackie, getting back to your roping experiences, you're a bit doubtful of all these roping experiences, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the one in Papua New Guinea is most likely frigate birds. People are saying. I mean, some of the people, if somebody who lives inland in Papua New Guinea, if a frigate bird came in, and it's not normally in that area because they are, I think, they're seabird, aren't they? It would look a bit unusual to them, so they wouldn't be familiar with it as a native animal. So similar with Mbembe, the dinosaur in Africa, they reckon some of the sightings are elephants swimming, that
Mm-hmm.
people see them, reported them are often not always used to seeing swimming elephants. So it looks exactly like a dinosaur because you've got the head coming out and the hump on the back. So, a similar thing could be with a frigate bird, and that the missionaries are telling them it's a dinosaur because they've got, investment in thinking it's a dinosaur to prove, creation happened as it did. So you've got, and then trusting the missionaries with that. So, that could be happening. It might not. I mean, there just seem to be, there was also a report in Papua New Guinea of a massive giant lizard that attacked, village. I can't remember was it? It was like it did exist in Australia. It was like a massive big Komodo dragon creature. I can't remember the name of it, but there was a report of that, and so there could be things. I mean, that there's uncontacted tribes in Papua New Guinea still. It is supposed to be one of the places they still cannibalise. So,
Wow.
Bruce Parry got, and talked to Rex about this. There is some evidence that still happens. So it's an incredibly unexplored area, yeah.
Wow. Go on, Ben, you want to say something?
So whether there's the idea of there being giant reptiles, I mean, there are giant reptiles that exist. The aforementioned Komodo dragon, and there's which is a huge lizard. There used to be much larger ones in Australia, like there was the giant goanna, which I think was like about 20 feet long or something. And as far as creatures that can survive through mass extinctions from the distant past, that does happen too. I remember that's David Bellamy. Do you remember when David Bellamy used to do those TV shows for the nation? He actually was showing this lizard creature, and I remember seeing it when I was a little kid. He says it looks like a lizard, but it's not a lizard. He says it's much older than that. It's older than the dinosaurs. He said, and he was holding up this creature, and
Tuatara probably.
that was it.
Tuatara from New Zealand, isn't it? Yeah.
It has like a little spot on its skull because it has like it's really interesting.
Pineal
creature.
gland, isn't it? That goes to the light, affects the pineal gland. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's very, very old. It's been around for much. It evolved far long before the dinosaurs, and it's survived. It's passed through these various mass extinctions, and it's survived to the present day. So technically, it's possible like a big it's like a sort of brontosaurus like theropod dinosaur, but it's described as being much smaller. It's been described as being about the size of an elephant, or maybe smaller than an elephant, whereas a real brontosaurus was like about 5 times the size of an elephant. It was huge. Would there be food for it to eat? If it's a vegetarian, it could like eat the tree, leaves, or maybe eats leaves or something like giraffes do. Would it have any?
I mean, why have the old dinosaurs? The vegetarian ones, because they didn't have grass in the times of dinosaurs. That evolved relatively late. So you see any like movies with dinosaurs on grass, apart from Jurassic Park, it's not accurate at all.
No, yes,
but they didn't have grass in those days.
I heard something about dinosaur times that they believed that the Earth's gravity was slightly different back then, because they said if you had a brontosaurus in today's world, it would not be able to hold up the weight of its neck and tail.
Like a whale, they could just crush its own organs.
Yeah. So I think it was Andrew Johnson might have said it, or he heard about it and related it to me. But yeah, so they believed that the weight of the Earth or the gravity of the Earth was slightly different, maybe more moon-like, perhaps, so that these creatures could move around. And maybe, I don't know how long the moon's been in orbit supposedly around the Earth, but maybe the distance of the moon was slightly different to make that so.
It's getting further away, isn't it?
Yeah, it's getting further away, yeah. So
I know there are theories, there's various theories that it goes into very, very strange areas, like the Earth is expanding, things like that. By what mechanism has never really been explained, how the Earth actually could expand and increase mass. Where's that mass coming from? Things like that. But there's no...
The tape measure is the thing that he's going to get a tape measure line.
It's really it's a really incredible idea if that's true. But we did. It is true that the Earth. This is not disputed that the Earth's day used to be shorter. And I watched a documentary about it. It's one of those Walking with Dinosaurs type, very sophisticated animations, where it did say, that the Earth, the length of the day was it was 23 hours and 16 seconds or something, 16 minutes rather than 24 hours, things like that. And that the Earth's the oxygen content was much higher in the atmosphere.
In a way, the oxygen was different, wasn't it?
That's why those giant insects, because you couldn't get insects that big today because there's only 21% oxygen, and they have, the way they breathe is not through the way we do. In fact, if we lived back then, we wouldn't be able to breathe because the oxygen content would be too high for our lungs.
Whereas,
we would become we would become we would hyperventilate. Yes, so there is that, and it makes you wonder, maybe it's feasibly possible that something from that era did survive, which we don't know about. But maybe the reason it got smaller in size has to do with this gravity business.
Or it could have evolved independently and created the same looking creature. You don't, it doesn't have to come from that era, be a survivor or one that to carry on breeding. Something could have evolved since,
Creatures, increase or decrease in size for evolution, like the pygmy elephants and things like that. You get so. Theoretically, it is sound. Whether it actually exists or not is another matter. But theoretically, I'm open to the idea. Theoretically, something could exist like that.
Now, it's interesting that the creatures that seem to have survived from the dinosaur age, like you've got the alligator and the crocodile, both water-based creatures, and then you've got the coelacanth fish as well, which was thought extinct. They seem to have come from that dinosaur period and survived right through. So they survived right through the changes in gravity, in the oxygen content of the Earth, and that kind of stuff. And it's interesting that they've survived this supposed extinction event, which was the asteroid hitting the Earth, apparently, in sort of like South America or wherever it landed.
So I suppose they're all relatively small animals. I reckon a lot of the small animals did, because they can get into, caves, but they said the big ones wouldn't have had a chance because they wouldn't have get cover. But yeah, that's the theory.
There was also one of the effects of this asteroid hitting the Earth was there was a global cooling over, I think, a 10-year period, 10 to 20 years. It was the Earth's temperature dropped by about 5 degrees, and they couldn't cope with that. But again, some creatures will adapt to that, others won't. But I mean, when it comes to the sea, that's a completely different matter. I mean, most of the living dinosaur reports come from the sea. For example, there's the it was in I think in World War I or World War II. There was a German U-boat off the coast of, I think it was off the coast of Ireland, and this creature jumped out of the sea. They described as being like a crocodile, except it had flippers instead of legs. Now there used to be a dinosaur. I think it was called the Aratus, the Henosaurus, I think it was called. That actually did look like that. It was an aquatic dinosaur, and apparently the crew didn't know about this. They didn't say, "Oh, there's an Henosaur." They said this is it's like a crocodile-like thing with flippers. And they saw it leap out of the sea, and there's I mean, if that's the case, then it's possible in the oceans, because in the oceans is finding things in the ocean is far harder than finding them on land. It's, for a population of unknown creatures to exist in the ocean is much more likely. Indeed, they have. I mean, there were creatures like the giant squid, which was a cryptid, and then its existence was confirmed. We could be looking at something like that, which may be a living fossil, something that survived the big hit and has thrived in the ocean depths, away from. Obviously, it's not like a dolphin. It doesn't approach us and try to communicate. It's something that may be actively avoiding human contact.
Interesting. You mentioned about the giant squid, and there's that story. I remember seeing it on the Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World program. And then I subsequently looked it up online, and it was the guy that I think in the original series he had died sort of when they made the series, but I think his sisters and his friend were discussing the case. And this would be about 1981 or something. They were filmed, I think. And it was this guy that survived getting torpedoed by the Germans. And there's like 5 or 6 of them in this raft floating somewhere. And I think it was at nighttime. First, some huge creature came over and pulled one of the people under, completely shocked them. And then a few minutes later, it came back and tried to get this particular guy that was survived. And because his friends saw the previous guy, they immediately grabbed to him and held on to him. And eventually it just sort of went away, but it pulled bits of his flesh off his leg and left huge scars on his leg. And he survived.
Sucker marks, didn't he?
That's right, yeah. And they worked out from the sucker marks, they worked out from the size of the sucker marks on his leg with the scar and everything, that they worked out it was at least 26 to 30 feet long, this huge squid. They said they couldn't see it clearly because it was dark, but they could see the shape of it against the night sky as it came over the boat. So yeah, one of these rarer things where a person gets attacked by a giant squid.
The late Lieutenant R.E. Grimani Cox was returning home to England in 1942 when he encountered one of the Second World War's most nightmarish sea stories. His troopship was sunk by a German raider in the South Atlantic. Cox found himself on a fragile raft beset by sharks. After 5 days came a sinister assault. Cox showed the evidence later to a friend.
Well, when I looked at his leg, he pulled up his trousers and I could see scars the size of a penny, which is about 1.25 inches of the old penny, were dotted at intervals all the way up his leg. And these were white scars, sunk quite deep into the flesh, where the skin had been pulled off.
Before he died in 1971, Cox told the story to his sisters, as well as to his friend, a biologist, Professor Cloudsley Thompson.
Yes, he didn't show me that. He only showed me the...
You did that.
You were his sisters, and this was in the mess. There were 12 of them on the raft initially, and only 3 survived to the end of the 5 days. And one of the most horrifying things that happened while they were lying there, dying one by one from thirst, was one evening when they were attacked by a giant squid. An enormous shape appeared beside the raft, and a huge arm came over and snatched one of the men and tore him off the raft before anybody could do anything to save him. And presumably he was eaten. And they were still barely recovering from the shock of this when another arm or tentacle came over the side of the raft. He saw it silhouetted against the starlit sky, and it fastened itself on him, round his leg and round his body, particularly his right leg, because that's where the scars mainly were, as he showed me, but I believe he said that they were on the rest of his body as well. And he'd have been pulled off just like the others, only fortunately, by that time people were alert, and so they grabbed on and held him. And instead of him being pulled over the side, the suckers pulled lumps of skin off his body. And this is what caused these massive number of scars all over him.
And he survived. Yeah, so you can almost call that dinosaur. And its size, the fact that you expect squids to be small little things, and they used to be big millions of years ago. But here we are, and we've had sightings in 2007 where they've actually filmed in Antarctica squids at certain depths, huge squids. And Japan, they've hauled up some in their nets and things, fishing boats and things. So they've been proved to exist. They were always laughed at, but they've been proved to exist now. So I wonder, with the technology, as we're going forward, with the technology, what we've got, that you would be able to get better at finding these things, whether it's Ropen in Papua New Guinea, or indeed Bigfoot in the great northwest of America or something. It's a lot. Technology's on our side to find these things.
Well,
that's good. I mean, just getting across Papua New Guinea, really. I mean, it's still, most people have to use the missionaries' planes, and there's only so many places that can land, so it's still quite difficult to get across. And I think, as one film crew was saying, it was a bit of a pain trying to move around because some of the people are very poor realised if you're a film crew, you potentially had a £10,000 tip. And some of the very rich film crews were having to, basically hand out this money to some of the tribes. They're all getting, so each tribe was asking, and it's great, they deserve to earn some money, but it was getting to the point where it was getting unaffordable to move across the land. So there are issues like that in Papua New Guinea. There's all sorts, and there's some very, obviously, My friend's uncle went, there's stuff, diseases there we just don't have. And there's somebody, dad lost some of his foot on Papua New Guinea because of the, it's very humid environment. So, it can be quite a dangerous environment to sort of live in. Yeah.
Yeah, blimey. And then you've got to survive. Which tribe are you going to get eaten by? Maybe. I mean, maybe they're pretty friendly out there, most of them, but you might come across the odd tribe that you weren't expecting, but never seen you before.
I mean, Brett Parry got a confession that somebody had been eaten 18 months before when he interviewed them, and that was on it so many years ago. I think those beliefs are quite strong, and it's about like possessing overcoming the evil side, isn't it? The person, you have to eat them, and they, that's their belief, really. So
you inherit their wisdom, and you inherit their cleverness or something. This is things I've heard. I mean, it might vary from country to country, but by eating part of that person that was a village elder, you take on some of their wisdom and wisdom and spirit or something like that as well. So it's done more of a kind of a metaphysical sense rather than just a nutritional thing, So,
yeah. That's quite interesting.
I can imagine their Saturday nights might be interesting. Are you eating in tonight or you're eating out,
Yeah. Beats McDonald's.
Well, that's right. I mean, Sunday roast must be a pleasure out there, Go to Grandma's for Sunday roast and find it's actually Grandma that you're eating.
Yeah.
Oh dear, yeah.
But we jest, people. So let's move slightly away from the ropen and the plesiosaur and the pterodactyls. Jackie, your experiences with Bigfoot, and obviously you could put like lots of arguments against Bigfoot exist, and there's lots of skeptics out there saying, "Oh, but you're seeing bears and things like that." Now you claim to have seen them, and your battery had run out at the wrong moment, hadn't it? You were charging up your battery.
Oh, what happened? Yeah, it was the day I'd been charging, and it was just, in the cigarette light, but below. And before that, I'd always had it not connected and jammed into the front of the windscreen with my neck pillow, with the ones you fly with, to stop me getting the correct neck. And that worked quite well. And it was the day I wasn't doing it. Well, my friend said he's quite spiritual. He said, "Oh, like you weren't meant to film them." It might have, and it's talked about the Sasquatch Summit. I would say 80% plus of people at that summit, even 90%, have seen them. But the issue is, should we share that information? Are people ready? Are they just going to shoot them all? And it's quite political stuff because. They discovered a species of owl in Oregon, and they lost billions to the economy because they had to stop logging in that area. So it's a very sore point, and a lot of the rangers and the loggers just aren't allowed to talk about Bigfoot. They get really panicky if you ask them questions. So we're not allowed to talk about that, and you don't get them say, "Oh, we can't talk about unicorns," or they get quite panicky.
That's an important point. I mean, there are certain legislatures that have now passed laws to protect Bigfoot, even though it's not officially recognised to exist.
There's about 3 or 4 states.
Oregon, certainly in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, there are representatives.
Partly that's to protect people who dress up in monkey suits to fool people so they don't get shot.
Well, I understand.
Because it's a raw animal, and I think it's a Washington state law, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So if it's found to be human-like, you'll get had for murder, and if it's found to be ape-like, you will get had for shooting a rare animal.
Yeah. So this is. Yeah. I know. I'm on the skeptic forums. They were taking a mickey out of this, but it's a serious business because, no offense. I mean, I know we have listeners in the United States, but no offense to them. But Americans, being Americans. What's the first thing that could happen if this is ever openly discussed and acknowledged to exist? What's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to go and they're going to get their double-barrel shotgun out of the cupboard, and they're going to head out into the woods to be the first one to bag one for the shelf. And the problem with that is that we don't know how many there are left. For all we know, they could be critically endangered. Until we know what their population is. Because we know that, like at Bluff Creek, that the area where Patterson and Gimlin had their sighting. You don't get like sightings there anymore because there's a big log-in road there, and there are lumberjacks everywhere. And of course, these creatures.
I mean, that's where my sign was, though, Ben. My sign,
really?
miles away from Bluff Creek, but it's not easy to get to. and it's also a lot of marijuana, illegal marijuana growing around there. So you're in quite danger if you go in the area. We speaking to a ranger, he said, don't go this bit, don't go that bit, it's too dangerous. So, I mean, it's still, there is a massive big logging road, yeah, it's right next by it, but at the same time, we only saw one truck in literally 10 days. So,
So
so you had one other car coming, but when we were on that road, we saw one truck.
But we are still,
and it's still quite remote, yeah.
This is still a creature that appears, although it will approach humans at times, it still obviously wants to keep its evolved kind of evasive behaviour, as many animals have. Evolved evasive behaviour towards humans, and so I mean, it could be that they are, that we don't know how many there are, we don't know what their population is, and so I understand why the first thing I would do if the government should do if this thing, if it ever possibly positively acknowledge things exist, is say leave them alone, don't touch them. You're not to hunt these creatures. It's quite understandable.
It's interesting because one of the people that supposedly brought a Sasquatch in was this guy. I think it's Frank Hansen. I think his name was. It was mentioned in the book "Everything You Know Is Wrong" by Lloyd Pye, who did come on later on to talk about the Star Child skull. But before he went into those areas, he had written a book about Sasquatches and the Patterson Gimlin film. And he also mentioned his experience as a child in 1967, where he would see this, what was called the Minnesota Iceman. And it was this guy, I think his name was Frank Hansen, and he would take it around shopping malls and travel in fairs. And it was allegedly, he made up various stories about where this creature had come from, because I think basically someone had pointed it out to him, maybe a lawyer or someone like that, that if this is decreed to be at least part human and you've shot it, you could be out for murder. And so he made up all these stories about where it had come from, Hong Kong, and or it's found in
the coast of Japan, and they said it like
no story was ever straight, but eventually kind of wrote a more honest account later on, when he said, I don't remember pulling the trigger, but I heard the gun go off. So he wrote it in such a way that he wasn't admitting to killing it, but he said he saw 3 of them. And interestingly, like the Patterson Gimlin film, when they first encountered their Patti Bigfoot, this one was drinking by a water or something, and one ran towards him as if to attack him. And he said he doesn't remember pulling the trigger. That's what he said, to protect himself in legal terms, but he obviously shot it, and he killed it. And then he didn't know what to do, and he left it there for like 6 days, and it snowed on the body. And he kept thinking about it. And eventually he went back with a friend of his, I think, that he confided in. And they found the body under the snow. They put it into the truck. And so he decided to put it in his basement and put it in a freezer and covered it in ice. And he kept it there for a year. And eventually, I think with the permission of his wife, they agreed on a sort of a plan that they would go around touring around shopping malls and call it the Minnesota Iceman, but be very cagey about what it actually was. But to kind of help back up the story of what kind of creature it could have been, they actually called in some anthropologists who spent about 3 days examining this thing. And they're on film going saying, we've never seen anything like this,
Heuvelmans, though, believed there was a good reason for the true story to stay hidden. A reason that, if true, might prove to be a violation of national law.
We were struck by many things, the enormous hands and the enormous feet, and also, more especially, the features of the face, because it was absolutely unlike any man on earth. It was obvious that this creature had been killed, because the one eye was completely missing, and the other was hanging out of the socket, and it had blood all around, so we thought it was probably shot in one eye, and the bullet made the other eye pop out. There is no question that the Iceman could be a hoax, a faked dummy, rubber dummy, or what have you, as they told in the press. When you have seen something, we examined this creature for 3 days, very carefully, and we were very suspicious, I can tell you, at the start. But after a while, that was quite ruled out. No, there is absolutely no doubt for me that I have been examining a Neanderthal man, a surviving Neanderthal man.
Heuvelmans believed the specimen to be a kind of human, rather than a non-human primate. But for most, the Iceman generally matches the image of a Bigfoot or Sasquatch.
And even when they were examining this in the eyes, they said you can tell it was real hair, real blood.
Evidence had been shot in the eye, didn't it? Which consistent with doing a model. You wouldn't do that, you know.
That's right. It was shot in the eye, and the pressure of the eye shooting out of the head popped the other eye out. So both of his eyes were missing, or one was hanging on a bit of tendon.
Yeah.
And but they examined its hair and everything. Although they couldn't get down and get samples, I think part of the glass cracked or something. So the story went, as one of them leant on it, and some of the fumes from this body leaked up out through the ice, and they could smell it. It smelled really awful. So, you know, if you're thinking this is just a rubber man suit thing, it wouldn't smell like that at all. So they could definitely smell the decompositional things as the air got to it. So by and large, it looked like it was a genuine, and a lot of people thought they estimated it was perhaps a young 6 to 7 year old Sasquatch, because it was only about 6 foot tall. It wasn't a...
I was going to say, it wasn't massive, was it?
Yeah. And then later on, when he started getting worried about maybe being arrested for killing a potential half-human, he decided to swap it with a rubber dummy. And that's where the story becomes a little bit clouded, because then stories of the FBI.
Yeah, and that's when I think that's when it gets a bit... I start to get a bit suspicious of it, really. Yeah.
But Lloyd Pye, who was a believer in the Patterson film, and he's got theories about the whole thing, he said there's no way this was fake. He said, I remember seeing it as a kid, paying 3 or 4 cents to see this thing, and up close you could see that it was a creature, a real live, once living, breathing creature.
Hominid researcher Lloyd Pye witnessed the Iceman for himself. It triggered a lifelong passion.
Body was in a 7-foot freezer, long and about 3 feet wide and about 3.5 feet deep. It was put in with its knees lifted up a little bit, and it had its arm up over its head.
Over the years, showman Frank Hansen came out with several stories about how this creature was found. At one point, Hansen even claimed to have killed it himself in the Minnesota woods. Lloyd Pye believes this is a credible story.
It sees him, it puts its arm up like this to protect its face. He shoots through the wrist, the bullet plows right between those 2 bones, goes into the eye, and blows out the back of the head. The Iceman shows us by its reality that what we think about ourselves and about the fauna on Earth is just not the way it is.
He had very big hands and big feet, and they said if you're going to fake a dummy, why would you give it extraordinarily big hands and big feet? And I think it's something to do with when they measure children's rate of growth, they always X-ray their hands.
Yeah.
They can work out your growth rate through your bones and your fingers, and perhaps this is a similar thing with the Sasquatches with their big hands. I don't know for sure, but that's just...
like dogs, isn't it? A dog with big feet is going to end up with big dogs.
Yeah. I don't have any big dogs in blocks of ice, but I could go with that. But yeah, so he supported the Patterson Gimlin film, which has been analysed now. They've managed to stabilise the footage, which is something, obviously, Patterson and Gimlin, when they shot that in 1967, had no idea that, no one did, that such technologies would exist 50, 60 years later.
I mean, I'm friends with Gimlin, and he's honest as a die. He's a really honest bloke. As soon as you meet him, you need 10 minutes talking, thinking, no, that guy wouldn't fake anything. It's just, and, you look at the analysis of it. I mean, there's a massive big trapezium muscle on his back, like a gorilla showing,
How far away was she when you first saw her?
Just across the creek. About like from here across the creek. When I first saw her, she was standing upright. I thought, this is unreal. The way it was moving, the massive muscle.
Roger had the camera up to his eyes, and he stumbled and fell. Where you can see the shakiness part. I rode across the creek. I got off the horse and took my rifle out of the scabbard in case I had to make a shot. She made that turn to look. Kept right on walking. She went on up out of sight up that canyon. All this time I'm thinking, holy mackerels, these things do exist.
People don't have that. I mean, the length of the torso, the way it moves, not even human. You know, when people say it's somebody in a gorilla, and you're walking across a dry creek bed looking over your shoulder, we'd go flat on our face, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
You know,
well, that's an interesting
thing of that animal.
I saw an interview with a girl who was a costumer. They call them furries, as them. They make furry costumes.
That's amazing. But that is really convincing, that video.
She sort of talks about it.
Yeah.
How that if you're in a suit, you cannot see where you're going across that creek bed.
The most convincing thing of that video, she said that you can see the shockwave going up his leg. She should just get that
the muscle.
outfit.
Yeah,
she said we need hydraulics to get that. And she said they would not have had hydraulics then. They wouldn't have even known about that to make it look authentic. She said you know, some of the really state-of-the-art though people have this hydraulic effect on that, but they wouldn't have known about that. In many ways,
As far as the legal issue goes, I mean, supposing these creatures were acknowledged, I mean, it would all depend on what kind of creature they were. So physically, they're clearly not human. As we are. However, they are simian. They're obviously a type of ape, and they walk like we do. No other, unless the orang pendek is not real. We are that could be real. I know Richard's got his own opinions on that.
There's a couple of wildlife cameramen I've seen. Gregory Holden, I think, Australian cameraman, has seen it, and Debbie Marter, the Tiger Conservation Officer, has seen it. I mean, I spoke to Gordon Buchanan, Scottish wildlife cameraman, and he was quite keen on trying to get funding because he said the others are a bit, either such that you get Bigfoot's a little bit, you can get a bad reputation for going. But he said the orang pendek said, the cameramen think, that's a real animal.
I think that's real. I mean, talking to Richard, I think it is.
Yeah.
But officially, we're the only upright walking primate on the planet. I mean, in the past, there were more that walked on two legs. They had their hands free to grasp things, and they had flat feet like we do. The Gigantopithecus is one that's often mentioned as possibly could be related to the modern Bigfoot. I suppose the upright stance is something, because it's something unique to us. If we see another creature that's not human that has the same kind of locomotion and stance that we do, we may, as indeed Lloyd's, this guy Lloyd knew, we may start thinking, well, should we consider these things animals? Now, I suppose it would depend on their level of intelligence. This is a debate that goes back to the ethics of whale hunting, when scientists started to discover things about whales and dolphins that were not known previously, because people used to consider them little more than air-breathing fish. Then they discover they have a huge brain, and they are capable of communication of very complicated kind. They clearly are. I know that I think it was India that classified them as a third type of being. So they're not animals in India. And officially, I think they're not animals and they're something else. They're not human, but they're classified as sort of semi-human.
Well, I mean, gorillas, they've now shown gorillas have a language. And when I sat with mountain gorillas in Africa, and I thought there's a primitive language going on here. And then they say there is a language. And even monkeys, they use grammar. Monkeys use grammar, There's a thing where something they use in front of a word that means it might be a snake. I'm not sure, be careful. And then there's another sound they make for the sound snake that means, it's definitely a snake. And they behave completely differently. And they think that's a primitive form of grammar.
They found out about like whale song and dolphins and dolphin calls. these actually obey Zipf's law. In other words, it's like an organ. It's not just like making noises for simple communication the way dogs and cats will, but it's something more complicated. So maybe this dividing line between animal and human will become more blurred over time.
I think it is already. You look on YouTube, there's loads of videos of showing animals doing things that people didn't realise they could do, And I think when they're realising they're not quite as different as us, I think there's a lot of ethical implications, isn't there?
If I went to Japan and someone served me like some sushi, I'd say that's a fish, give it here, and I'll eat it. But if someone served me and said, "Oh, this is a piece of whale meat," I would not want to eat that. I would feel uncomfortable eating that for the reason. And so we're getting into a realm where, supposing an upright creature that had a very high level of intelligence, we don't know how intelligent they are in terms of it could be they're more intelligent than, say, gorillas and chimps. This is why it could be there may be elements in the system. I don't want to get too conspiratorial because we're talking cryptozoology, but that may not like the idea that such a creature could be acknowledged as real if they turn out to be too intelligent and too much like us. Darcy Weir, a guy who he specializes in ufology, but he also deals with cryptozoology. He's a documentary filmmaker. I interviewed him talking about the Sasquatch and about how some of the loggers up in Canada, where he comes from, in British Columbia, there are reports of them dying and the bodies being taken away by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, this is extraordinary because we hear this in ufology all the time, that there are like crash retrievals like Roswell, where the government come in, they seal off the area, they remove all this decisive physical evidence, and then they say it was a weather balloon. This is the first time I've come across this kind of activity relating to a cryptid. Is there?
From the Helen's fire, there's supposedly Bigfoots taken away and been burnt and died, but you just don't know really. There's a lot of fantasy stuff, and I find it quite difficult in the Bigfoot field. There is a lot of fantasy stuff. I had a conversation with my friend who's American about this, and we both felt some of it goes back to the Barnum, circus stuff, that it was okay to create these fantasy animals because it was entertainment and, you could make money, money for your family out of it. And he feels it, it's still quite a big thing in some cultures. So it's trying to see the fantasy and the reality. And I think sadly, it gives, some honest Bigfoot a bad name.
Of course, yeah, because you have a signal to noise, it increases the noise in the signal. But the point is there hypothetically a motive why state actors would want the existence of the Bigfoot to remain a fringe official pseudoscience? Because
the logging industry is a big one. The logging industry. I mean, loads of the logging investments, and this owl that was discovered, Saw Point in Oregon, literally for loads of people, basically couldn't log, a lot of people were rich and suddenly went very poor. So it is a sore point. There's also the religion side of it, that if it's a missing link, people don't want to accept that. A lot of my, one of my mentors, Tom Cantrell, he's also a pastor, and he prefers to call it a regressed man or a type of man. He won't use the word hominid, and, he's into evolution, but he feels more comfortable because of his religion. So it's difficult, really. It would challenge a lot of people, wouldn't it? Yeah.
What's a regressed man? Sorry, Ben, go on.
I just put a link in chat. You don't have to stop the program to read it. But yeah, at your leisure, you might find it interesting. It's called Keeping Bigfoot Secret. It's actually an article I wrote, and when did I write it? 2022, about this particular subject. About this particular possibility. So I mentioned Darcy and his reports that he discovered.
I'll put that link in our program description.
Oh, thanks, mate. Cheers.
Yeah, getting back to this pastor then, who would prefer to keep Bigfoot described as a regressed man.
Yeah, I mean, some of the First Nation people feel that Bigfoot was originally a man, and then something happened. He went into the forest, and then he became more man-like. Now, there is some evidence of, feral children, they get hair, don't they, on them to keep the bodies warm. And people with anorexia do. They start to get a fuzz on them to keep the bodies warm. So that's one theory. But obviously this, people have seen Bigfoot close to. They're not, they don't look like a man, a massive, But and there was Melba Ketchum, wasn't it? I mean, debatable. People think it's just corrupted DNA.
She's the one who said it was maybe a hybrid.
She believed part of it came from. I can't remember which way round, but the male was human and the female was Bigfoot, or vice versa, I think. But that's her theory. I mean, she was one of the people who analysed the DNA of the bodies in, the Twin Towers in 9/11. But Professor Brian Sykes says there's, the geneticist I used to know before he died, said there's a real risk of contamination. Him and another guy pioneered this DNA washing thing, which when they get sample, they have to wash off the contaminated DNA. And I don't know the exact details, but it's very, very high risk, of getting contamination. So it's difficult, really. Yeah.
There was sorry, Neil.
No, go on, Ben.
Okay. There are stories that appear all the time about ape-human hybridization. In fact, there's even been experiments done, especially in the Soviet Union, of an attempt to hybridize a human and an ape. There's a legend of one that was done in the United States once, but it was kept quiet, and there was a baby that was apparently then put to sleep. Although it appears that some animals can hybridize. We know that donkeys and horses can hybridize. We know that sheep and goats can hybridize. They can and could produce offspring. I think there's some specific reason why humans can't with other great apes. It's something to do with our chromosome number or something that we can't actually hybridize, because there's been attempts to do it in scientific circumstances. There's legends in every country where we live alongside these beings that occasionally we get together with them for saucy romps and create little babies and things like that.
Sounds like a good Friday night.
There's no evidence to that. There's no evidence that happens.
It's interesting. I'll just have to tell you this funny story as we're talking about apes and chimps and gorillas and things. Now, about 2010, something like that, I was invited to this wedding. No, was it a wedding? I met some people. That's right. I met some people at an event, and my friend that was with me had met them initially at a wedding. So that's where the wedding thing comes in. So it's nothing to do with the wedding on this particular occasion, but I was chatting to them. And the husband said that his wife that was there, she wasn't actually telling me this, but the husband related me the story. He said his wife, her father was the original commercial TV director that directed the PG Tips chimpanzee adverts.
Get in the hang of it. Mind the banisters, son. Oh, I can't hold it, Dad. Don't worry, son. I shifted more pianos than you've had hot dinners.
Cream, Mr. Shifter. Like refreshment.
Oh, thank you most kindly, madam. One way of shifting it.
When a good cup of tea really counts, you're right to drink Brook Bond PG Tips. It's the tea you can really taste.
Dad, do you know the piano's on my foot?
You hum it, son. I'll play it.
Where you got PG Tips.
Richard Freeman used to sometimes look after them, because he was innkeeper at Twycross Zoo, and when the keeper was away, he'd look after them, and he said, as an adult, they just rip your arm off.
Yeah, I remember
really
saying.
Aggressive. Yeah, really aggressive.
But when the adverts became really popular in the UK, and the director, this lady's father, used to direct about 5 or 6 of them, where you got the chimps drinking the tea and pushing the piano and that kind of stuff, and they're saying, you hum it, son, I'll play it, all that kind of stuff. And they became very popular. Well, the story went that the husband related to me, said that this lady's father received a phone call from a German TV company who had seen the British TV adverts, the PG Tips chimpanzees, and he said, we really love these adverts with the chimpanzees drinking the tea and talking. Would you remake them for the German television commercial market? But could you do one thing? Could you teach the chimpanzees to speak German? This guy actually thought that they were really speaking. So hilarious. So when you talked about chimps having verbs or adjectives, they reminded me of that story. I thought, I thought they were really
speaking.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah.
There was a lady called Denise Hersing, incidentally. She's trying to learn the dolphins' language, and she hasn't had any success, but she has worked out apparently dolphins in different parts of the world speak different languages the way we humans do.
And they have signature whistles, which is their name.
Yeah, they have names.
They're the
and
name,
things like that.
name, yeah.
But see, so her work's continuing, and she's like spends a lot of time recording them and trying to decode them, and even trying to have conversations and things like that.
They're amazing animals. I did my dissertation on dolphin behaviour for my first degree, and I've swum with wild dolphins, and they are quite amazing things. The dingle dolphin, my partner found fungi. And we parked the car on the beach, and we thought, oh, there's grass growing on the beach, we'll be fine. We didn't realise it was the highest tide of the year. The dolphin kept coming over to us. We were around the corner from the car, coming over to us, doing this amazing leap, and then going away and looking at us as if to say, you've got to come round the corner. So we followed him. We found the car was getting full of things coming up. The dolphin is definitely telling us, your car's sinking, you daft devil. So a double backflip means your car's sinking, you stupid idiot.
Oh, fuck you.
He was definitely trying to show us. It was really funny. It kept coming backwards and then forwards. And
we should get dolphins to start selling PG tips in future. I think that's
no, that's
nice. Exactly.
Fungi will do almost anything. Because fungi will come out for the tourists. It's this is in County Kerry, on the far southwest of Ireland, and he's been there for years. And of course, people feed him. They always bring things to feed him with, so he's not going to go anywhere as long as people keep feeding him.
I think the original ones died, they think, but it's this Fungi Mark II, another dolphin.
Yeah.
Took over its role. It was very bizarre, and they were even accused of bringing another one in, but it wasn't. It was just a wild one. I'd probably seen the other one getting attention and then took over. Yeah, it's really bizarre that. Yeah.
There's probably more than one all along, I think. It's quite
there might well have been. Yeah, it was quite a large one. I remember it kept flying over my head and missed me by inches. And size of a horse, it was fungi. It was pretty. Wow. The ones in dolphinariums are quite stunted. This was a full grown, and it was not small.
Wow. So, I mean, there was Flipper. I remember Flipper from the TV series back in the 60s and 70s. They used to have the TV. I always was under the impression that dolphins saved people from sharks, because in Flipper, the dolphin would go up and batter sharks in the stomach or something. There was
a big whale, wasn't there, that saved a researcher a while back. The whale literally kept pushing her, and she thought, what's it pushing me for? And then she realised there was great white nearby.
Crikey.
On videos, this, and basically she wondered, it kept pushing her with its fin, and then she realised that it was trying to save her. Yeah.
Wow, this is why kindness to animals has to be one of the cornerstones of civilization, in my view. We humans, if we're not kind to animals, then we can't call ourselves a civilized species, because especially we don't know, especially animals we don't know anything about them. Sometimes we learn they're very, very intelligent, but we still treat them like dirt. We still put them in tanks and cages and kill them and things like this. So I think that the Bigfoot issue has, I think, a lot of there's ethical issues associated with it, and I think this is going to become more apparent as we gather more evidence about its behaviour.
When you went to Australia, Ben, did you hear anything of the Australian Bigfoot when you was out there?
The Yowie? No, I didn't. I to be honest, I had less of an interest in. This was in 2000. I went there. I had less of an interest than I do now. I had a vague interest. I mean, I read a couple of books. I've always had a kind of interest in this sort of thing. But there is a Bigfoot-like creature called the Yowie, and there's a guy called Gary Opit who's been researching it, along with things like mermaids and other weird creatures that live around the coast of Australia and live on the continent of Australia. Stories date back to Aboriginal times, and it's not unlike the American Bigfoot. It's similar in appearance. I think it's slightly smaller, but people's sightings continue to this day of the Yowie.
I saw a guy at Dorset Earth Mysteries back in February called Richard Hutley, I think his name is. Hurley. I can't remember now his surname. Forgive me. But he did a really good hour-long presentation on Bigfoot, and he covered briefly the Yowie. And he had a photograph of one that had been caught on a security camera or something. and you could clearly see it had a toe that came out rather like a hand. So it was more like a sort of a chimp's kind of foot, if you like, rather than the straightforward Bigfoot that we're used to in the Pacific Northwest or something.
Yeah, maybe it's semi-arboreal. Maybe it climbs trees occasionally.
Yeah.
Actually, a good resource for anything.
The hands on Bigfoot, the thumbs down really low.
Uh-huh.
A lot of people who've seen them say that. I wasn't looking at the hands, but I know people who've seen them said the thumb's a lot lower.
Right.
Trees, because Bigfoot's would climb trees as well, yeah.
A good resource for this sort of thing, and they're not paying me to advertise or anything like that, is Nexus magazine for weird things in Australia. It's an Australian-based magazine that covers this sort of thing in great detail, and I very much recommend it. That's just my personal opinion.
Now, what sort of things would Bigfoot eat then to survive out in the wilds of the Northwest and Canada?
It's an omnivore. It's often a good way of seeing them is in the autumn when you've got the berries, because they often have the backs to people, so that there's a lot of sightings there. And they also eat, there's often clams found stacked, they think of Bigfoot, so they'll supposedly go in water after food. They often kill pigs, a deer. They find them with their legs ripped off with a hand rather than a bear scratched with a paw. There's some also they hold the way they supposedly grab the top of the head and the bottom and they rip the head in two. There's a lot of bears wouldn't be able to do that. So there's and also bark. They find bark stripped off that's been done with massive big hands, and sometimes it's really high up, so a human definitely wouldn't have done it. Always bears, you can see the claws go, with the Bigfoot it's like, stripped off the clear fingers. So they eat lots of different things,
I saw this when this guy Richard did his presentation. He showed some trees that they believe for Bigfoot kind of marker points, I think, where they live a tree and they'll take it and stick it upside down.
Oh yeah. Well, chimps do that, something similar. They'll do things with sticks, supposedly chimps. So, and I'm not too sure. I mean, gorillas do an amazing. I thought it was done by human. They do this weaving thing with a nest, and it looks like a empty basket. And it's actually just the undergrowth. I've walked through one of them, and they're just amazing. Yeah.
So this guy Richard was talking about the fact that they found similar kind of nests, and what they think, if I recall it correctly, is that this would be the lookout nest, if you like, of one of the Bigfoot to look out for trouble. And he's like the sentry for maybe the rest of them that are out somewhere in the woods somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's his base for the night or something.
I've seen one. I've seen what we think was one, and you could tell it's not heather. It was some sort of American plant. I don't know what it was, but it was a bit like heather, like dried primitive heads on it, like you would heather. And you could see where something with hands had taken the bits off, and it was all in a big pile. So that was quite interesting. That definitely looked like something had made a nest with hands. And
that's obviously not like it's going to be something specific like to a particular creature that has that dexterity rather than
that's it. I mean, I know something with tops off jars of cupids, but raccoons can do that as well, and raccoons can also take wrappers off things, which Bigfoots are sometimes accused of. There's also a weird thing my friend showed me a picture of, that they find these mice, dead mice, but they're all wrapped up in a leaf, almost like wrapping, and they're all tucked under, and they reckon that's Bigfoot. It's almost like it's a snack for later,
Wow.
That's it in the leaf, and it's really intricately done. Looks like weaving, and it's all tucked under, and
it's got best before date. So the other thing is that we can't not cover the story of Albert Ostman, who was the gold prospector from 1920. Do you know the story well to retell it?
Yeah, he was in his sleeping bag and something suddenly grabbed him and threw him over his shoulder, and basically I don't know how he did it, but he managed to say it was a Bigfoot, and then it threw him in a cave. And his theory was that they wanted him for a mate for the female. But he managed to get away. He managed to get away by throwing, I think, snuff at its face, didn't he, or something? It was joking, and he managed to leg it. But I mean, it's an interesting one as well, told by Roosevelt, isn't there, the American president, an old crapper, and they were, one of them said he'd go off and get the last of the traps, and he came back, and the other one had his neck broken, and they'd seen the big footprints, and they'd heard the sounds, and something had broken his neck, so they reckon that was a Bigfoot, and that was basically quite a reliable report, you know.
Yeah, but the Albert Ostman story, it was near Vancouver, I think, and he was about like in his 60s when he came forward with his story, because he was only like early 20s or something at the time when this happened to him. And the reason he came forward, it was, I think, in the late 50s. He started to see reports appearing in like Life magazine or something about, new reports of loggers encountering large footprints in the woods and things. And he thought, I'm going to tell my story. Now's the time. And he gave reports even to like a sheriff who said, this is the most honest report, down to earth guy I've ever met. And he's telling me as honest as the day is, the truth. And he's even, I think he even went on a lie detector machine. For what it's worth, but he was out. I think he was taken by a Native American, Canadian First Nations person. I think as the guy, but he'd only taken so far, and he sort of said, "Watch out for the big man of the woods," and he kind of laughed, not really knowing what he was talking about. And for the first 4 nights, he had his little camp, and he kept thinking raccoons and that was stealing his stuff. And he knew something was watching him and taking his stuff. It wasn't until the 4th night he suddenly said he found himself hauled over the shoulder of something big, and he fell into the bottom of his sleeping bag. And I think because he had all his stuff with him, he managed to carry it with him. And they
he put the boots at the bottom of his sleeping bag.
Yeah,
a lot of people do. So sleeping bag. That's quite normal. Yeah.
Yeah. So he said that he was estimated he was in this sleeping bag for about 4 hours, being bumped and going for miles and miles, and he was taken to this enclosure somewhere. And it was only as the day started to break, he could hear the breathing of this creature, but he wasn't sure what it was. It's only as the dawn started to come up and it started to get light, he realised he was amongst these, I mean, he probably wouldn't have called them Bigfoot at the time, but big hairy people. And there was like a mother and father, and like there was a daughter and a son who were sort of teenagers, and he said that they kept him there for like 6 days or something, trapped. They wouldn't let him escape. So he would he tried speaking to them. He'd say, "What do you fellas want with me?" But they just grunted and they kind of talked their own language or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Sierra Sound. My friend's actually heard that. He's had this thing whacking on the side of his truck, and he heard them, and he said it really is real. They do.
Wow.
It's like a primitive, and you listen to the recordings of it. Ron Moorhead's done, and it sounds like some primitive, exactly what you'd expect a primitive ape man to be doing.
Yeah.
The sounds, and they've had people analyse it, and they say it's definitely in between human and ape.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was
quite weird.
David Paulides had that in his documentary. He featured the Sierra Sounds, I remember, but he didn't sort of make any conclusion about what caused them, but he did include them in his documentary about the hunters. But it just goes to show that, I mean, we should, if you want to go looking for these Bigfoot people, Bigfoot creatures, whatever they are, you've got to be cautious because they can be aggressive, and especially in Alaska, where the Nantinak in particular seems to have evolved some very, very hostile behavior, even though it seems to be physically very similar to the other Bigfoot. But
they seem to get bigger the colder you go, which is consistent with real animals, because you look at the size of polar bears, it's like, I can't remember the scientific principle, but it's like helping them retain heat. That's why polar bears are so massive. Whereas you get the South American bears, they're quite small, aren't they? So, so it's, I mean, the skunk apes are relatively small, about, 5 foot odd, the size of a person, whereas some of the Alaskan ones and, Canadian ones are, you get reports of 12-footers, and it is consistent with what you'd expect. The colder it gets, the big you need to be. So
there's an entire town in Alaska that had to be abandoned, and there's all kinds of stories about why that happened, because it's quite a successful fishing village.
Oh, yeah.
Some people say it's because of the Nantinak and Portlock.
Yeah, probably people kept being found with their necks broken, didn't they? And,
There's a really good it's not really a documentary, it's like a home video really that has been produced as a documentary by some people who go and visit Portlock. It's quite exciting. They go back to Portlock to check it out.
Wow. So getting back to Gimlin, Bob, is it Bob Gimlin? So for those that need to know this,
two Bob Gimlins. There's the Gimlin, Gimlin, from Patti, and there's another guy called Bob Gimlin who does things about.
Oh, that's well confusing.
Well, yeah, it was a different spelling. Yeah, I can't remember the spelling of it, but I thought that was a bit weird.
Okay, so for those that need to know the story, this is a film taken in Bluff Creek was it Northern California? And you've been...
It's Northern California, yeah. It's basically, there's actually a place called Billings Stand next to the sign. It's quite a big area. Northern California. Yeah.
And they'd gone there searching for Bigfoot because he had become a bit of a fan of Bigfoot footprints, Roger Patterson. And he had hired a cine camera, Kodak cine camera. And I think they were out there for 4 days initially looking for Bigfoot footprints. And they were walking down this dried up creek riverbed with their horses when they came around a corner and one of the horses started to rear in fright or something. And that was the clue that they were literally right on the doorstep of a Bigfoot who happened to be down, presumably drinking some water because it was crouching down when they first saw it. And I think because Roger Patterson's horse reared up, he sort of fell off his horse but managed to land okay. He managed to get the cine camera out of a bag or something on the side of the horse. And he said to Bob Gimlin, cover me with your rod in case something happens. And so he did cover him and he watched him and he said he'd fallen over originally when he was trying to film this thing. And he obviously noticed them and it just got up and started to walk away. But then it gave the classic look back at them over its shoulder as it walked away. And I remember, I don't know which person said it out of the two, but one of them said it gave a look of utter disgust at them. That was the way they perceived that look. And since that film has been analysed, there's a mark, you see it on the thigh of Patti as she's walking away. It's like a black, long mark. And they say that is where... They know it's not a suit because it's where the fur has been worn down as the hand keeps moving past it.
Which is normal for those sort of animals. Some animals with long arms, they do that. And I think there's also, they say you can see a ruptured tendon on a leg as well, which isn't something in space,
Yeah, and they've looked in and you can see the toes bending up as it's about to take its step into the thing. That's something you'd never ever be able to do in a suit. And around that time, they were making the Planet of the Apes films. I think the first Planet of the Apes film was released a year later in 1968. So it was literally in 1967 they were in production for that movie. Yeah. And the special effects makeup expert was a guy called John Chambers, and he had obviously been practicing and tried all sorts of things to try and get the look of the Planet of the Apes correct. Various makeup tests, and they tried various masks and things. And eventually they settled on this idea of individual appliances that would be stuck on their faces so they could get a number of expressions. And I believe it was some years later when he is retired and in a nursing home, because I don't think he would have said this professionally whilst he was in employment. And this lady apparently disguised herself as a nursing home nurse to get this statement from him. She went in undercover and got a statement, and she started talking to him, pretending she worked at this nursing home. That's as I understand it. And she started talking. I think she may have even secretly recorded it. I'm not sure. But she started to ask him about this Patti film and what did you think of it. She says, do you think you could do this kind of makeup on something like that? And he allegedly said to her, and of course he thought it was just a nurse. He didn't think she was a reporter or anything like that. He said, "Oh, I'm good, but I'm not that good."
That's good, yeah. I know, that's amazing. Yeah, it just showed. And Bill Munn's the same. Bill Munn, who did, I'm trying to think the thing he did. I think he did the Predator film ones as well, but he did Harry and the Hendersons, and he was asked to give his opinion on the Patti film in terms of was it costume, and he's now a big fan, so that says it all, doesn't it?
So
he's now become a bit after being asked to analyse Patti's film.
Yeah.
He said that is a real animal. That is that's in the suit, and he's now a big fan. He gives talks at big
Wow.
I
always saw this Rick Baker being in the Bigfoot film and the Hendersons. I always thought that was Rick Baker who did the costume for King Kong.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel Mum's had something to do with Harry and the Hendersons outfit. I can't remember. I think they might have. Yeah, it might have been the move that I know we had something to do with it.
There's probably a number of people that are, working on the suit to make it work rather than just one guy in it, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
They have to do all the muscle twitches, and that's probably done with cables to people out of shot, and then in the Patti film, you just see one person or creature walking along, muscles flexing, as you say, the toes moving. There's no one else in sight. Now, the other thing, I haven't looked into this deeply, but I've heard kind of bits and pieces, and I've got to watch a few more YouTube videos to get some insight into this, but maybe you might know that there was talk of something, a Bigfoot massacre in that area or something. Do you know anything about that?
I mean, I've seen their interpretations of it, and I mean, it's just laughable, They're looking at little bits of, because obviously the film's digitised now, so you're going to get, and they're trying to interpret things, and I think it's laughable because
there's someone that says, "Oh,
I mean, I've asked Bob about that. There's just treated up, just oh God, right? But, yeah, I mean, it's just laughable.
There was no other Bigfoots in the area.
That's a good news. I wouldn't want that to be real.
No.
I mean, it could well have been other Bigfoots because typical thing that Bigfoot will do, it'll make itself seen to divert you away from the young. Yeah. So they say there's been a lot of accounts of that where they realise they're young ones and they'll get themselves. So you look at them and while you're turning away, they grab the young or they get the young out of the way. So they reckon sometimes that purposely make sure they're seen so you can get that. Right. That's one theory, what was happening, that she wanted to be seen because she was trying to get away from a young. Yeah. But,
it was
laughable.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to massacre them, surely someone would have brought forth a body. I mean, apart from this guy, Frank Hansen, who did the Minnesota Iceman, unless he was involved in it as well. But he was in a different part of the country. But, I mean, there appears to be frames where someone's analysed it and believes there's another Bigfoot sighted in the trees or something like that. And it could just be paranoia. But I don't know. But certainly the Bigfoot, the Patti one, is the clearest one we've got. And even today, people are debating whether it's real or not. And you're thinking, if that was fake, it would have been found out years ago, wouldn't it?
I mean, I've watched all the analyses of it. I've spoken to Gimlin and Patterson. I 100% think that's a real thing. I mean, it's very similar to what I saw. The ones I saw were males. My friend said they were a lot more athletic, but she's a female and she's going to have bigger hips. She's going to be more chunky, So yeah, they're very, very similar to what I saw.
And Gimlin suffered a lot in his personal life over this, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, initially they got so sick of the ridicule that he sold the film for hardly anything, literally, tiny amount, to the widow of Rennie Dalhidden, because they sort of had tried really hard to find Bigfoot, got really angry and disillusioned near the end, so he just started selling it to him. And he didn't want anything to do with it. And he said until people started, these programs like Finding Bigfoot and all that, people started taking it seriously, he suddenly thought he'd start talking about it then, but he didn't talk about it for years, I mean, I think he was on Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, but I think that was about the only time he appeared. He wasn't, he's only recently regularly started to do stuff. I mean, he's an elderly man now, he's now in his 90s, but, and he'll say to you, this was loads of years ago, he'll be quite honest and he'll say, my memory might have distorted, but he said, I know what I saw. He said, but details of it I might have distorted because my memory might not be.
He's being pretty honest, isn't he?
He's really honest, and he'll tell you all about, that he said, it could have been a man in monkey suit, it could have been set up by Patterson, but I really don't think so because he looked like a real animal. And he'll say, that they were tracking it, and he said, an idiot would have got had by a bear or something dressed in the suit like that, so he would have been attacked by something or shot. So, it's just, he said he really thinks it's, it's a real deal. But, very, very honest, and he'll say, he won't go, oh, I've seen loads since. He'll say, oh, I saw one. I was around a campfire once and we saw some in the shadows that could have been another one, but I'm not too sure. He won't say, oh, I've seen loads of them, like he would if you were, not being telling the truth. It's very honest, gets quite angry when people try to rip him apart because you meet him, he's so honest.
Yeah. He comes across. I mean, I saw him on the Arthur C. Clarke program when he was about 45 or something. Very fit younger guy, and now he's like 95 or something. You're thinking, my God, this guy's still around.
Still amazing though. It's like he just before I sort of met him, we were out. I think it was 2012 or something, one of my first time I went out, and we got a report that he'd been thrown very badly by a horse into a wall or fence. He'd broken his neck back, and he was in a row, and it was expected he might not survive this one, because he used to break in horses, still breaking in horses in his 80s. I mean, this guy's tough. And I met him about a year and a half after that, and he was clearly very stiff, around the top bit because it's still got that probably permanent damage. But his legs are like a 17-year-old. He crosses them just like, I couldn't even do that. I mean, it's just amazing when he sits down. These legs are legs that are obviously used to grabbing onto the horses. It like bendy like anything. It's like, guy, I mean, when I met him, he was late 80s, but I mean, he's still incredibly fit for his age,
Yeah. Wow. So he, again, I don't know which one said it. Probably both of them, I'd imagine. But I'd imagine the more statements we're in, they're probably coming from Bob Gimlin because he's the surviving member of the two. But they said they wish they'd just shot the darn thing to stop all this debate because they could have just brought it in and it would save them a lot of headaches. Is that right?
I don't think Bob would have because he's he's half First Nation. I think he might be Cherokee. I know he's half First Nation, Native American. So I don't think he would because their beliefs are very strong. You don't do anything to it. So it could have been Patterson, but I don't think Bob would have said that.
Yeah. But they also took, and this is mentioned in the Lloyd Pye book, which I'd recommend anyone to go if you're interested in the Bigfoot thing. He actually believes they're Neanderthals, the Bigfoot as Neanderthals that have not died out, and they've just moved further into
Neanderthals are too advanced. This is definitely, I would say, what I saw the closest Homo habilis seemed more primitive.
Right. Okay.
I reckon the Russian owl masty is possibly Australopithecus because of the descriptions of it in a way. But what I saw looked like Homo habilis is far more primitive. Because basically Neanderthals, they were just like me and you. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It's like finding a thick-set person, with a big brow. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference if you took them down the high street. But and they were, quite advanced. I wasn't too sure that Neanderthals could speak, but there's some evidence they're quite an advanced culture. But I think it's going to be a lot more primitive than Neanderthals. I know there's a lot of books about that, but it's definitely, it's going to be a lot more primitive, really.
I think it's because the Neanderthals are the only one that most people have heard of on the kind of, the average person in the street. They don't know about.
They keep saying that, but exactly. It's sort of,
Yeah.
It's quick to come off the tongue, isn't it? Rather than Homo habilis is a bit of...
that's Neanderthal sounds better.
Homo heidelbergensis, that's the same animal. They've got different names, but
It works well with the Zachariah Stitchin sort of stuff as well, which Zachariah Stitchin was the guy that came up with the idea of the planet Nibiru, which came into our orbit like 50,000 years ago or something, and they created slaves on the Earth to mine their gold. And he sort of thinks that that was where the Neanderthal came from. And then, I don't know, parts of humanity divided off, and maybe that's where the Bigfoot ended up going to escape from man as man developed. That was a kind of rough theory anyway, but I would suggest anyone go and look at the revised version of the book, Everything You Know Is Wrong by Lloyd Pye. He's now passed on, unfortunately. So, but there's also videos on YouTube where he's presenting his talks and his discussions about it. But he was
Gilgamesh, the saga of Gilgamesh, they reckon Enkidu, is it? He's an ape man. Yeah.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, he's meant to be an ape man, which is interesting. He could have possibly have been in Neanderthal. I don't know.
Interesting.
Ape man. Yeah.
Right. Well, we're drawn to a close here. So, is there anything you'd like to promote, Jackie? Are you doing any presentations or trips or podcasts or books or anything?
Not really. I mean, myself and Richard Freeman, going up with Richard to do conference at Lapis, and we're going to have a bit of a tour of weird things up the north. We're possibly going to go to Bollum Lake, the monster there, and go to Whitby, look around there, do some paranormal stuff as well, because I also do paranormal investigations. So, so we're just going to try to find, there's supposed to be up the east coast, sort of just from Newcastle, there's, bodies were found trussed up and supposedly serpent sacrifices to the serpent. And there has been a thing like the Loch Ness monster seen off the coast there, witnessed by people. So that's quite an interesting one. So there's, I might do things like that. But longer trips, I really want to get to Australia to look for the thylacine. Richard's one of Richard's things, but I've also spoken to a lot of people. And we're going again to Adamant to research again Jeff the Talking Mongoose. Although we do have a logo, Simon Pegg stole our mongoose, because they did make that film, but we weren't impressed with the film. It was a bit of fun, but it wasn't very accurate. But so, and I'm hoping to get out Bigfoot again in America at some point. Oh. I don't believe there's an English Bigfoot. I think if there is anything, it's paranormal, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, we've hardly even touched on the paranormal side of Bigfoot associated with UFOs and things, which I know Richard doesn't believe that connection, does he? Sort of thing.
I think they're just inquisitive. If there was a UFO, they'd go and have a look like we would, and I think they'd just be associated. Just because two things go together doesn't mean they're correlations.
It's the way we're
that big thing in the sky. It doesn't mean they're from the big thing in the sky. So.
Yeah, like us. They probably think that we're from it as well, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
Ben, what have you got planned? Anything coming up?
Well, I'm doing what I always do with my keeping my blog and my radio shows going. So that's always useful, always a continuous project for me. Don't forget to check out my book, Roswell Rising, a Novel of Disclosure. If you're at all interested in any of the subjects.
Really good, that, yeah.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. Thank you. There's 2 sequels if you're in any way interested in any of the subjects we talk about on this program. So that's what I'm doing. I'm not speaking. I'm speaking at an event next March. I don't have the details yet. So I'll let you know. If anyone else wants to book me to speak, just let me know.
Oh, and you might come down to do a talk next year for the Dorset Earth Mysteries.
I might be returning there for, I think, a 4th time, which is going to be great.
Yeah, that would be cool. Next summer, maybe. We shall see.
Yeah.
Well, for anybody that's interested, my book, True Tales of the Paranormal, I think is due out in October. So when this goes to air, there may be on the shelves. You can certainly pre-order it off Amazon. True Tales of the Paranormal by Neil Ward, which covers everything from various ghosts and spirits and all sorts of strange things, which will be of interest to many people, I hope. So look out for that. So thank you very much indeed to Ben and to Jackie. Oh, and I better plug Andy again. Andy's Tuned In events. The October season is upon us. So look out for Andy's Tuned In events on Facebook. And if you're in the Southeast and you want to go to one of his events, find Tuned In Events, TUNED, I think, events. And that will be on Facebook, and you can perhaps find out where Andy's going to be doing demonstrations of mediumship and go meet Andy in person if you're there. So thank you very much, one and all, for watching this. Thank you again to Jackie and to Ben for joining us on the Paranormal Peep Show, and have a great Halloween, everybody. Cheers. Good night.
All right.